Welcome to the Education Committee. I'm Senator Dave Murman. I'm from Glenville, Nebraska, represent the 38th District, which is a line of counties along the southern part of the state. I serve as chair of the committee. We have our committee members with us today who will introduce themselves, starting on my far right.
Good afternoon, Rita Sanders, representing District 45, the Bellevue Offutt community.
Good afternoon, Luann Linehan, representing District 39, which is Elkhorn and Waterloo and Douglas County.
Lynn Walls, I represent District 15, which is Dodge County and Valley.
Fred Maher, District 41, Central Nebraska, north of Grand Isle.
To my immediate right is legal counsel of the committee, John Duggar, and to my far right is the committee clerk, Shelley Schwartz. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, interim study resolutions are introduced by senators who believe that the legislature should investigate certain topics that may be the subject of future legislation. The Education Committee is here today to receive information about these topics. The committee will hear the following legislative resolutions this afternoon: LR 303, LR 378, and LR 496. Testifiers will need to fill out a green testifier sheet for each resolution you plan to testify on. You will find the green testifier sheets on the table in the back of the room. Please print and complete the form in its entirety. When it is your turn to testify, hand the green sheet to the committee clerk. This will help us maintain a more accurate record of the hearing. If you have handouts, please make sure you have 12 copies and give them to the clerk when you come up to testify, and they will be distributed to the committee. If you do not have enough copies, we will make sufficient copies for you. State and spell your name before you begin your testimony. To help facilitate these proceedings and maintain an accurate record, we ask for you to assist us in the following procedures. Please mute cell phones and electronic devices. The committee members may use their cell phones for researching information pertaining to this hearing or be alerted for another hearing they may need to attend. They also might come and go during the hearing. This is just part of the process. We will begin with the introducing senator's opening statement, followed by testifiers, and then the senator's closing remarks. Please move toward the front of the room when you're ready to testify. How many here are planning on testifying on LR 303? Okay, we'll have a 5-minute time limit on 303, only a few testifiers. You will have 5 minutes for your initial remarks to the committee. When you see the yellow light is on, that means you have 1 minute remaining, and the red light indicates your time has ended. Questions from the committee may follow. No displays of support or opposition to a bill, vocal or otherwise, from the audience are allowed at a public hearing. Now we will move to the first resolution on the agenda, LR 303, by Senator Murman.
Welcome, Senator Murman.
Good afternoon, Senator Walls and members of the Education Committee. My name is Senator Dave Murman, representing District 38. Today, I'm introducing LR 303, which studies the feasibility of bringing the classical learning test as a possible college admissions test to Nebraska. Before I go into what I think are some potential benefits of this, I'll provide 2 points of clarification. One, I am not looking to replace the ACT by any means. I view the addition of the CLT as a way to expand the number of options parents and students can think about. The college admissions process is no doubt stressful for families. So I think there's a benefit to giving those families a bit more options in choosing how to go about that process. I also choose to do this as an interim study rather than a bill because there are more moving parts than just the legislature here. It's up to the Board of Regents at the university or state college level to decide admissions standards. It is also the responsibility of the Department of Education to administer a college admissions test selected by the state board. What the legislature could do is take a look at state-supported scholarship requirements. We have scholarships such as the Career Scholarship, which specifically uses ACT scores as an eligibility requirement. That requirement could be amended to also accept comparable scores from other recognized college admissions tests. But that piece alone, without the other two, has a pretty limited effect. So my hope is that this study can start to work to get the ball rolling and start up the conversation between these different systems. Because right now, I'm not sure everyone on this committee is even aware of the CLT. So I'll talk a bit about that. However, there will be a representative from the CLT behind me as well. The CLT, or Classical Learning Test, functions similarly to the ACT. It looks at verbal reasoning, grammar, writing, and quantitative reasoning, and can be administered through an online proctor or in person. One of the things I appreciate about the CLT is how it seeks to curate its reading comprehension passages from important texts throughout history. Authors who have appeared on the test before have included ancient thinkers like Homer and Aristotle, founding fathers in our history such as James Madison and Benjamin Franklin, and more modern thinkers such as Martin Luther King Jr. and even Nebraska and District 38 native Willa Cather. I see this approach as valuable because it has students who are hoping to attend college engage with the authors and texts they very well might study in college. I also see there is value in not giving one private company too much control in something very impactful such as college admissions. I don't at all say that this is an attack on the ACT, but say a problem did come up and that families had some kind of concern about the ACT. Ideally, there could be other recognized and comparable tests families could turn to. But right now, our system doesn't really have that framework in place. Ultimately, I brought this up because I've heard from homeschool parents and I've heard from some of the Catholic schools that this is something they're interested in. And while yes, you hear from a CLT representative behind me, I'll make it clear that this isn't about them selling their product because they did not come to me pitching this idea, but I actually came to them. I've heard from families, especially homeschool families, who would love to see this. So I'd love to help those families out. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If there are especially technical questions about this test, I'll leave them to those behind me that can answer.
Thank you, Chairman Murman. Senator Conrad.
Thank you, Chair Murman. Quick question before we jump into the minutia of it. Why can't private school families or homeschool families take the standard admission test? They can, right?
Yes, they can.
Are they performing poorly on it because they're not prepared?
No, in fact, they're
Then why would they
performing
need an
well.
alternative test?
Because
If they're taking it and they're performing well and they're
Yes,
seeking admission?
because well, I guess I don't know exactly what the average homeschooler performance is on the ACT. I know some perform very well, some
Okay.
probably don't perform as well, but their curriculum often would not fit very well to an ACT test. It might fit better to another way of testing.
So if their curriculum isn't preparing them to perform well on standardized tests, how does their curriculum prepare them to be successful in higher education?
Their curriculum prepares them to be successful in life. I don't think it's necessarily toward a certain
Okay.
type.
And I appreciate that point of view, but
Yes.
that's not the subject of your hearing. Your hearing is as it relates to college admission.
The hearing is not.
So if
over.
a family chooses homeschooling or private schooling because they feel it will make them successful in life, that's a legitimate point of view for those families. You're asking us to relax standards or otherwise in regards to college admissions
No,
for
I'm
people who are not prepared or
asking-
performing.
Okay, sorry. No, I'm not asking to relax any standards. It
But
is
you
up
did
to
just
the-
mention some homeschool families can't perform well on the ACT, and that's why they need this alternative.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
It is up to the Board of Regents as to what tests they use for college admissions.
Yeah,
And
and-
you're specifically asking about that.
And we can't engage in policy minutia in regards to the university because of the Exon decision.
No,
which-
but we can discuss what the university is doing or how they're testing. We can have that as a point of
Can
discussion.
talk about it. Yeah,
Yes.
that's true. There
Yes.
is not a legislative policy remedy, but okay.
No, and I said that in my opening. It is up to the Board of Regents as to what test they use for
Okay.
University of Nebraska or state colleges.
Okay. Thank you so much, Senator.
Other questions? Sandy, thank you. Proponents? Come on up.
Hello, Senator Murman, and to the rest of the Education Committee. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. My name is Michael Torres. I am the Legislative Strategy Director for the Classic Learning Test. My name is spelled Michaeltorres. While I'm sure there'll be questions about what the CLT is and how it can benefit Nebraska students, I would like to start off by addressing a question that might be on a lot of people's mind at the outset. Why exactly is there another test in the first place? How did we get here? And that brings us back to Classic Learning Test founder. His name is Jeremy Tate. He was a public school teacher in urban school districts across the East Coast for several years, and then he started an SAT test prep company. He did that through the early 2010s into the 20-teens. And then when the tests and schools started to align themselves with Common Core standards, he thought that the market could be better served by having a test that aligned with standards that he felt had stood the test of time, classic principles of education in the liberal arts tradition. And so he started asking friends and family, what do you think of the idea of starting a new standardized test? To which he received some harsh criticism. People told him there's no way that people are going to take up another test. This industry has been dominated by a duopoly since the 1950s. He also was asked several times, isn't that illegal? People associate the ACT and SAT with the government so thoroughly that they think that it is the only option that could ever be allowed. Of course, that's not true. It's a free country, free market. So he went ahead and started the company despite pushback from people who were even close to him. He had a whopping something around 80 students take the test the first year, and 2 colleges accepted the test, who he had known people who work there, as an experiment. The company has since grown substantially. We expect to administer nearly 250,000 tests this year. And we expect that growth to continue significantly. I would also like to highlight that the Classic Learning Test is very similar to the ACT and the SAT in how it's constructed. It is a valid and reliable test of English language arts and mathematics, and it has a very reliable testing mechanism, or a scoring mechanism, excuse me. It is nevertheless unique from the SAT and ACT in how it administers a test of those same subjects. As Senator Murman underscored, we source our reading passages from rich texts that have stood the test of time. You can find them in our technical report. Unlike other tests, we are very transparent in where we source our reading materials. You can see them here. Obviously, students won't know where the exact reading passage is coming from. So there's new ones included all the time to ensure that students see different test forms. Students have to contend with a single passage for approximately 10 minutes, answering multiple questions about that passage. It could be Aristotle, Hegel, Friedrich Nietzsche, Frederick Douglass, Federalist Papers. The list goes on. Very impressive list that we work on with a board of academic advisors who serve in universities and policy positions across the country, and basically give us advice on how we could provide a test that meets the standards that they would expect of their students when they get to a college. And then the other difference is how we go about our mathematics. Not a significant difference, but we do have a more liberal arts approach to mathematics. It includes logic and reasoning questions, which you will not find on other tests. So those are some of the main differences between our tests. I will say that we have had a significant growth in interest, especially in the last several years, from homeschool students, as was addressed earlier, as well as private school students. But over the last couple of years, the increase in public school students taking our tests has been significant, especially since we were adopted in the state of Florida, which I'd be happy to answer further questions about. With that, I'll leave it and see if you have any questions for me.
Do you want me to keep going? Senator Linehan.
Tell us what happened in Florida.
Sure. So prior to 2023, the classic learning test was exclusively used by private schools, K-12 schools, and private universities for the purpose of admission. And we only had the classic learning test, which is the equivalent of the ACT or SAT for college entrance assessment. In 2023, the state government in Florida decided to start investigating whether or not they could introduce competition into the college admissions market in the state. The governor's staff there started looking around to see if there was another company, and they found us and asked whether or not we would be interested in working in that realm. We said, certainly, we haven't worked in that before, but we decided to go ahead. They worked on some legislation that ultimately included us in what is called the Bright Futures Scholarship, which is a publicly funded scholarship for state universities to qualify students for graduation requirements, as well as a couple of other reforms. In going through that process, we were asked by the State Department of Education and legislators there to first finalize a technical report that established the validity and reliability of our tests to the standards that would be required of the university system of Florida, as well as to create a concordance report, which correlated the scores on the classic learning test with the scores on the SAT, which is also correlated with the ACT. Once we created those reports and they met the standards of the State Department of Education, the legislature there went forward and passed the laws that I had just mentioned. Subsequently, the Board of Regents for the University System of Florida decided to adopt the classic learning test for every public university in the state. I will say that we did not expect a significant uptake of use of our tests in the state of Florida afterwards. We don't advertise a whole lot. We don't usually invite or try to push the use of classic learning tests into environments where we're not needed or wanted. If someone comes to us and wants to use our test, we're more than happy to answer any questions and facilitate the use of competition in that market. But that being said, once those laws were passed and the university system adopted the test, the uptake has been significant. We had well over 100,000 tests in the last school year taken in Florida by public school children, both for graduation requirements and to go to public universities. And we expect that number to increase significantly.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. But you ran Iowa. What happened in Iowa? You have difficulties in Iowa?
So yes, we also worked with the Board of Regents in Iowa. We are available to students to go to University of Iowa, the public universities in Iowa, for 2 of the 3 mechanisms that they can be admitted. The third mechanism is an automatic admissions program that they have that's sort of like a formula where students plug in their data and the system tells them whether they're admitted or not within a few seconds. They decided to consider whether or not to include the classic learning test for that formula. They asked a study team to investigate the classic learning test and see if we would be a good fit. Unfortunately, the study team relied solely on a report that was published by the College Board about the classic learning test and our concordance report, which correlates our scores with theirs, as I had mentioned earlier. They did not contact us prior to issuing the report or in the process of drafting it. As a result, they had several factual errors included in the report, along with the factual errors that are in the College Board report about our concordance. Some of them include, they mentioned that only 25,000 students had taken the classic learning test. As I said, we had 150,000 last year and about 250,000 this year. They also claim that public school students didn't take our test, but we have had significant numbers of public school students take our tests, and we actually included public school students in our concordance report in anticipation that there would be more public school students taking it so that it would still be a valid concordance. Regarding the College Board's brief that the Iowa team relied on, they also had some misrepresentations, I guess you could say, of the classic learning test. I can go over a few of them and would be happy to elaborate afterwards. Perhaps the most important ones would be that they claimed that the classic learning test is a test of classical curriculum. While we are informed by classical curriculum and the liberal arts tradition, we are not a test of any curriculum. We do not align ourselves with any particular curriculum, so we're available to any student in any setting, as long as the parents and administrators of that school choose to take a test that has the content that our test has. The reason they brought that up is because if a test is based on a different curriculum, you can't concord the scores. Unfortunately, that wasn't true. They also claim that we test at a different grade level. The one example they gave of that is that our test does not have statistics questions. I would heavily disagree with that interpretation. The tests are definitely able to have slightly different content and approach the academic constructs that they're testing in different ways. The ACT and SAT said exactly that in their own concordance report. So we don't have statistics questions in our test, but we have tests or questions on probability, which we see as the foundation of anybody who's able to take on statistics in a college setting. We also, as I mentioned, include much longer reading passages of richer texts than other tests do. And as I had mentioned, we have logic and reasoning questions, which wouldn't be in the other tests. So that, combined with the fact that we work closely with our Board of Academic Advisors to ensure that they are getting students who take our test, who meet their expectations, we believe makes it plain that we are testing at a college level. Finally, they brought up the size of the sample used for our concordance report. If you look at the ACT and SAT's concordance report, it includes hundreds of thousands of students, which is an impressive number, but also completely unnecessary. As anyone who's ever seen a poll, you don't need that many people to be included in it to get a statistical example that is sufficient to be used to reduce the margin of error. The standard psychometric number is about 1,500, and we tripled that. Had about 4,500 students, and it met the standards that the Florida Board of Education asked of us. So we believe it is a very valid demographic of students.
So are there only before this classical test, there's only the ACT and the SAT, that's it?
Yes.
There's no other national entrance exam?
No, ever since, I believe 1959 was when the ACT was created, something around then. There has not been any additional competition in the college entrance exam market.
Thank you for being here, appreciate it.
Senator Murman.
What would be the advantage to a college to use the CLT for a college admissions test?
That's a great question. As was discussed a little earlier, we have seen a lot of interest among homeschool families and private school families, including classic schools that are adopting classical curriculum. While we are not a test of classical curriculum, we tend to validate the information that is being taught in those schools while also providing a highly reliable and valid test at a college level that they can use to go to college. That enables public universities like the University of Nebraska to recruit from that cohort of students at a high level. Right now, we are in talks with several public university systems across the country If the University of Nebraska system decided to move forward, they would be ahead of the curve, quite frankly, and only be competing with University of Florida system, University of New Mexico, and University of Iowa so far. So they would have a large group of, an increasing group of private and homeschool students to recruit from. We also partner very closely with our universities who use us to connect them with students. So that would be the immediate benefit. The other benefits are, we believe that our tests provides a very, very good measure of a student's literacy and numeracy, but especially literacy because of the what we are including in our reading passages. We'll have students who are able to contend with difficult texts and answer several difficult questions about those texts. And so we're seeing people from individual colleges. For instance, we just had a phone call from the Public Affairs College at the University of Tennessee. They want to start recruiting CLT students before whether or not the university system is able to use it for admissions, just because they find that the quality of the students who score high on the CLT meets the standards that they're looking for in students for their public policy program. Similar things with Baylor, the Civic Institute at University of Texas. There's an Economics Institute at Clemson University, who are all trying to recruit CLT students because they're performing so excellently when they get to those programs. So those are a couple of the benefits.
Yeah, you mentioned how the popularity of the students taking the test has exploded just in a few years. Do you have any statistics? You mentioned that the students do well in college typically if they score well on CLT. Do you have any statistics or information at all on how well CLT test takers perform in college compared to SAT or ACT?
Yes, we since we're such a young company, we don't have longitudinal studies and the same type of longitudinal studies that the SAT and ACT have, which have been done over several decades ago. That being said, given the fact that we are a test of the exact same academic constructs in English language arts and mathematics, that we hired psychometricians to validate to create our technical report and validate the fact that we are a test of the same contents or constructs. And the fact that we correlate our SAT scores to SAT scores by about 90%, we can say that we are predictive of the same thing that they are. That being said, we are in the process of working with several researchers to do longitudinal studies. Kennesaw State University, for instance, just started a study of our first couple cohorts of test takers since they're now a few years out of college. That being said, we also feel like the demand from universities to recruit our students is itself, though anecdotal, a very important data point in assessing whether or not students who are taking the CLT are in demand by universities themselves.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Conrad.
Thank you so much for being here. Have you approached the University of Nebraska Board of Regents or State College system about changing their admission requirements to contemplate these issues?
We have not yet, quite frankly.
Why not?
We didn't know there would be interest. We've been involved in public universities and public schools taking our tests for 1 year now. And we have had interest come to us from several other states. And our policy up to this point has been only to work with university systems and with legislatures if they're interested in working with us. And generally speaking, up to now, that's been people like Senator Murman deciding to give us a call and ask us if we'd be interested.
Sure.
Of course, we'd be interested in working with the University of Nebraska system, and we think we'd benefit them and be more than willing to answer any of all their questions about how our test would work.
Okay, because I think Senator Murman agrees, and maybe you're not a lawyer, maybe you don't need to be, but the legislature can't set policy for the University of Nebraska. I think, so I guess this is information raising or something to that degree, but you also know that for the University of Nebraska and state colleges to a similar degree, they don't require that a student take the ACT or the SAT. There's a variety of different ways that our students can be admitted. Their high school grade point average is top half of their class, or an ACT or an SAT. So there's no specific requirement that a student has to meet,
Of course not.
a certain ACT or SAT. So what's the point of your test if they don't even have to do the ACT or the SAT for admissions?
I think there's two important points to that question. The first one being that a lot of students still submit a test for consideration, whether or not it's required. We found that a lot of students think that it adds to their application, even in a situation where the school says we don't need it to determine whether or not you're going to be admitted. The second reason is merely an argument about competition. If the university system or the legislature is interested in introducing more competition to the market, then that merely gives students more choices as to which test they'd like to submit. So we would be more than happy to be on the optional list. We're not arguing that they should require a test if they don't like to. We're merely
They don't require.
I know.
tests.
I'm saying we would never argue to them that they should change that to require tests. That is the regent's decision.
So-
We would merely ask that if they're interested, they include our test as well as one of the options.
Okay, so you mentioned this a little bit in your opening, and I appreciate your candidness, but essentially your company sprung up fairly recently, just basically to continue the divisive battle about Common Core. Is that really at the heart of your work, I guess?
I would say that the fact that the ACT and SAT align themselves with Common Core standards led to questions among people about whether or not there could be a test that accomplishes the same goal without being aligned to those specific standards. That came across because so many, both public and private schools across the country, for instance, in Texas, they don't use, in some other states, they don't use Common Core standards. Most private schools don't, homeschoolers definitely don't. So there is a demand and a desire for a college entrance exam that isn't of the exact same sort of
And then how
structure.
much does it cost to take your test?
$60.
Okay, and do you provide accommodations for students with disabilities?
Yes, of course.
And do you provide language access for students who don't have English as a first language?
As of right now, we're primarily English language test. We would like to move into Spanish, but we're focused on English test takers for now.
Okay, very good. Thanks so much.
Senator Murman?
Are there any other states that use the CLT as a way of as their education department evaluating student performance?
Yes, we are getting significantly more questions about how CLT can be included. Mostly because in the last couple of years, we also created the CLT 3 through 8 tests, 3rd through 8th graders, as well as the CLT 10, which is the equivalent to the PSAT and pre-ACT. A couple of examples would be in Louisiana, the State Board of Education and the Department of Education included our lower level tests in their state accountability system. So public school students starting next year will be able to use our lower grade tests for that reason. In Florida, as I mentioned, they can use it for graduation requirements. And we are currently in conversations with several departments of education and legislatures about including us in various forms of accountability and testing. Or in several states, for instance, they allow 11th and 12th grade students to take college entrance exams for free at state cost. In some states where they're seeing burgeoning classical charter schools, they want to ensure that the students are able to take a college entrance exam that validates the type of education that they've been getting and still also offers a very, very high level assessment that they can use to go to a college.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I have a couple questions. Just,
Of course.
I used to be a teacher, so my questions come from my past teaching experience. And one of the things, as you know, a teacher's day is already packed, just trying to keep it with teaching what we need to teach. So I worry a little bit about the impact on the curriculum that we have now and how this test, if it was implemented, would take priority over some of the other comprehensive education curriculum that we need to teach. Can you talk a little bit about that, or do you have any data on how that's gone in the past or feedback? Because for me, it's like a whole nother, I don't know where we'd fit it in, to be honest with you. So I just want a little feedback.
Are you talking about in public schools?
Yeah, as a public school teacher.
Okay. So this is not a test that would replace the No Child Left Behind or ESSA tests that are
Right.
required. The CLT would be a test that students would already be taking, like the SAT or ACT, in their 11th or 12th grade year. And if the state of Nebraska were to decide to implement this test, or the university system were to decide to allow it to be used for admissions, it would merely be the student's choice to take this test rather than the other ones, or more than one. Several students decide to take both the SAT and ACT, and a lot of test takers for the CLT take the other ones as well. So it would be up to the students when they're 11th or 12th grade year to choose which one they'd like to take to go to university. As far as how it affects curriculum, our test doesn't, as I mentioned, align to a particular curriculum. So we're not advocating for anyone to change curriculum. And we also don't see this as something that would negatively affect the ability of teachers to teach their existing curriculum, as it's a college entrance exam. I will also note that as Florida has been an amazing test case that that Nebraska could look to, as our test has been used for graduation requirement purposes from high school students and by 11th and 12th graders to qualify for scholarships. The response has been, quite frankly, amazing. The number of students who want to take our tests and the number of college counselors that are excited about having the opportunity for their students to take another test, especially among classical charter schools and other charter schools, but also among traditional public school districts. Several of the larger public school districts, for instance, right outside of Tampa Bay, have started using the CLT for their 11th and 12th graders. And it hasn't affected their ability to teach to their curriculum at all. We've had very great feedback from principals, college counselors, and people at the district level.
Okay. And then the other thing, how soon do you get your results back? Obviously that's very important to a teacher, the student's success, and the parents. So how soon can you expect results to come?
Usually by the next week. We try to get them back by the Wednesday following the test date. It depends a little bit on when the test date was and how many test takers we have in that particular week, but it's usually within the week.
Okay. And then one last question, and Senator Conrad kind of hit on it when she asked about accommodations for students.
Mhm.
So you just said yes. Could you expand on what kind of accommodations you have for students?
I wouldn't want to go into detail as I'm not a specialist on it, but we have an accommodations team who has worked in testing accommodations for years, and they implement it. So I'd be more than happy to follow up and give you all. Basically, we have a list of how our accommodation program works. I can send that to you. But
Sure, that would be great.
Yeah.
And if I can get can we get a copy of that report?
I brought several copies as well as a little brief,
Okay.
which I'd be happy to hand out to you as well. The technical report goes over exactly how the psychometricians we hired to analyze our tests found that it measures the same academic structures as the SAT and ACT, as well as how we create a reliable scoring system. We, frankly, in my opinion, are the best in business in doing our scoring. We use something called item response theory, and we're the first ones to do it. A little after a year after we started using item response theory, the College Board decided to start using it for their adaptive testing program, where they have online testing. So we were very much ahead of the game in that, and I'm very proud of our reliability in our scoring system.
Okay. All right. Senator Monahan.
Thank you. Senator Walsh, you said this already, but I'm trying to remember it and I didn't take good notes. Your company was started by somebody who was doing the SAT?
He ran an SAT test prep company in Maryland for several years.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you very
for
much.
coming today. Next proponent.
Senator Murman and Education Committee. My name is Father Mark Cyza, first name Mark, M-A-R-K, last name Cyza, C-Y-Z-A, and I'm a Catholic priest with the Diocese of Lincoln. And I work as an education specialist in our diocesan superintendent's office. I'm also the testing coordinator for our diocese. And we have 24 elementary schools, 6 high schools in our system. We serve about 6,000 students. I've worked in education for 20 years, about 20 years, both in public and Catholic schools. And as a teacher, a principal, a school president, and I now, in addition to my current role that I have now as education specialist, I have my master's and PhD from the University of Nebraska in education. And so I'm here to advocate for the adoption of the Classic Learning Test CLT as an alternative to the ACT for college admissions in Nebraska. And I would say the main reason, the ACT, just to give you a little history, our students do very well generally on the ACT, and that's been kind of the standard, if you will, for college entrance in Nebraska. Our students in our diocese average, over the last 7 years, they've averaged 23.7 on the ACT. So we haven't, so they've done very well. And I think in general in Nebraska, the private school students raise the average of the ACT about 1 point if you take all of the students together. So it's not a matter that we in the past have had a problem with ACT or anything like that. But as our bishop has recently issued a pastoral letter on education for our diocese, and that vision is derived a lot from his experience of going through the Integrated Humanities program at the University of Kansas. And what he really desires for our students is that they have this really a transformative experience where they experience the joy, wonder, and beauty of life. And they're able to develop as whole persons through the love of truth, goodness, and beauty. And so over the last several years, we've been adopting that within our revising our curriculum to reflect that, but then also to think about our pedagogy. How are we engaging students? Because in the world that we live in, we don't just want students to have high achievement levels, but what they really need now are the capacity for critical thinking. And we really believe that this approach will help give them an advantage in that area. And so in terms of when we start talking about missional alignment, when you look at what the mission of the Classic Learning Test is, it dovetails well with what we are trying to do. And so, like I said, not that our students are doing poorly or achieving low on the ACT or to have different things, but just as we continue to work in this direction, we think it would more accurately reflect what our students are learning. And because we believe that our students are good students, and they would be of an advantage to any university system, any school system, and things like that. And so if the university would accept that, or the state would accept it for scholarships or things like that, I think it would be an advantage for helping us to keep our students here within the state of Nebraska, and to and ultimately to get jobs. And they have been, like I said, our students are successful in college and in that way. So, but I think it would give us, like I said, it would help us to be able to partner better, with the university and with our school systems in that role of helping give our students those skills that they need to be able to be successful in the world that we live in today. Thank you for your time.
Questions? Thanks. Thank you, Senator Walls. Thank you, Father. Good to see you. I had the chance to go up and visit St. Pat's in Havelock
Awesome.
recently. It's a great school in my district, and it had been a year or two since I'd had a chance to get up there. So it was nice to see everybody, and the kids were doing great, and it was a really fun morning, and you have a great team up there. Quick question. Nothing prohibits you from utilizing this test right now?
No.
In any
No,
of your schools?
No, it's just.
And are you?
What's that? So we're looking at, so our contract with ITV, the reason that I've kind of gotten involved in this is that for our 3 through 8 or 3 through 10 assessments for NDE rule, for 10 and 14 for school certification and accreditation, we've been using those as our norm reference test. And so So we're looking at new vendors right now, and we've looked at the NWEA, which does the NSCAS test for the state of Nebraska. They have a product, Map Growth. We've looked at the Renaissance Learning, but we're also looking at CLT.
Okay.
And so just in thinking about in terms of where we're at, in terms of like missional alignment, the classic learning test is really
Right.
probably the one that aligns most with the goals that our bishop
Right.
has.
And
has set
you
for-
can utilize
Yeah,
it
oh,
right
yeah,
now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So there's no need for the legislature to
So-
do anything for you to align your religious curriculum with this test.
Yeah.
And
And
we
it-
actually shouldn't, right? You-
And it's, yeah, it's, yeah,
Right.
it's, and the part that I'm advocating for is in terms of our college, if we go with them as a vendor, then it, like I said, it would give our students something that would, if they're already using that in the 3 through 8 area, then when they go to their college entrance exam, that they would already be using that as their, that type of test. And so that's where our interest in using the CLT as a college entrance exam would come in.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I follow that, but
Well, okay, so-
if you
so-
feel that it's important to utilize for your curriculum or testing purposes or otherwise, you can absolutely do that, right?
Yeah. And what I'm advocating for is the college entrance part.
Right.
So
and that
so that
we can't,
that's
we don't
that's
have
the
control
part,
over
yeah,
admissions
yeah.
policies.
But there is, when we talk to, again, having that conversation or beginning that conversation here, whether it be with scholarships, starting out with scholarships, and if that can foster a greater conversation, we would be appreciative of that.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Senator Murman.
Thank you for bringing here. Would it be helpful to feel more inclusive for the students to be able to use the CLT test as a college admissions test? Certain colleges where it isn't now. I mean,
Yeah,
just
I would
help
think
them
so.
to encourage them to attend
Yes,
that college.
I would agree with that. Just in terms of, like I said, if we're using this as our norm reference test in the grades 3 through 8, and it's something that they're already familiar with, and then they can just go on and take the college entrance portion when they get to that part. I think that would be helpful. And then what I think it would also, whether it's the university or whether it's the state, it would be recognizing that what you're doing is important, and what you're doing is a benefit to the state, and what you're doing is a benefit to our college universities and our school, and as our students go on to stay in the state of Nebraska. So,
And then in a related subject, would it not be helpful to be able to use the CLT test as another test that would qualify for scholarships?
yes, I think that would be helpful for us. So
Thank you.
just to give another option. One of the things that I would be, just in terms of, again, the ACT has served us well. Our students have done well on it. The one thing that, one of the issues I have with it as an educator is that the test starts to drive the curriculum. And when you start thinking about in education, when you start thinking about what's important and what do you want to teach, that's usually what's reflected in your curriculum, right? But if you're just simply teaching to the test, and I've done this, at Lourdes, what did we do? We knew that the ACT was important, or they would get scholarships, so we brought in John Baylor Prep. Why? To help our students be able to do that. That's really educationally. That's really I don't know that that's necessarily where you want to be, because you want to look and see, first of all, what's important, what knowledge is worth learning, and what knowledge is not worth learning. And it's because you can't learn everything. You have to exclude certain things. And so right now, just the ACT really kind of controls that, and they really decide for us as a state what is important and what is not. So
Question.
Yep.
Are you finished?
Yeah.
Follow up.
Go first.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that real quickly, Father, what do you find objectionable about the ACT or its corresponding curriculum?
right now, nothing.
Okay,
I
that'll
don't-
do
yeah,
it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Senator
Okay.
Linehan.
Thank you. Senator Walls, thank you for being here today. I just want to clarify something. The CLT doesn't test religious knowledge.
No.
Because
It's-
somebody said something about your religious curriculum.
No.
It has nothing to do with this.
No, it's where it's drawing its text from, or like basically the text from Western civilization and things like that. That's why it's called classic. There are all sorts of classic schools throughout the United States, and a lot of them are not religiously affiliated.
That's what I
It's just a method of, a lot of our founding fathers went through, classical education,
Because we don't have charter schools here, but the first testifier talked about classical charter schools. They're pretty widespread across the country, right? And those are public schools.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, I know up in Milwaukee, they have classic charter schools up there. Down in Texas, Arizona, there's throughout the country. I know that there are lots.
So, thank you.
Other questions? I have a quick question. So where did you used to teach?
Oh, I've taught a lot of things. Normally, I teach religion, but I was also a English as a second language instructor, ELL instructor, and so that's So
Great.
I've taught a lot of things.
Okay, so here's my real question.
Okay.
I guess I am always concerned about, and I'm not saying that this is ever something that would be meant to be, but just setting up, we want to make sure that our kids don't fail in whatever they're doing. Do you think that our teachers today would be prepared to assist students to take this test? Or do you think that there would have to be some kind of teacher preparation prior to implementation?
As we've implemented a lot of the try to have like more classic pedagogy and things like that, or doing like seminars. To be honest with you, as I've looked at it, good teaching is good teaching. So I can pull a lot of things out of like Marzano model. That's actually probably my favorite educational model. When I was principal, that's what we used with my faculty. So having that, I don't think that this type of assessment really, I think if you have good teachers that are having good and strong professional development, I think that they would be fine with this type of assessment, because it's not really, whether it's your ACT, there are specific things that like the ACT where you can do better on it. And that's kind of what when you John Baylor prep, that's kind of what you're doing is you're looking at test taking strategies. You're looking at, okay, what are some different types of common questions? But in terms of like good pedagogy, good teaching is good teaching. So if you have good teachers and they're developing professionally, I think that they would be fine with a CLT.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions?
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much.
Next proponent. Opponents? Anybody that would like to speak in the neutral capacity? All right, Senator Murman is going to waive his closing. So we will move on to close the hearing on LR 303 and move on to the hearing on, let me see, LR 378.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, we need that.
Our online comments,
Somebody-
Okay,
we had none, so you didn't miss anything,
okay, good.
but both the next two.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Kleenex.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator Walls and members of the Education Committee. Today I'm introducing LR 378. I want to make clear that this is a study, not a commitment. Last year, during a legislative debate, the Board of Educational Lands and Funds was brought up in conversation. Senators across the political aisle began to debate the value of the BELF system as an investment in our state's education. I appreciated that conversation because as elected officials, it's important to regularly step back and look and consider if we are doing things the right way or maybe we should consider other approaches. The BELF system is also probably not talked about enough, but we should talk about it because how we fund our schools is incredibly important. So the goal of this hearing is not to cause concern about anything, but instead to give members of the BELF board and schools the opportunity to share more about how BELF works and include their investment strategies, hear some numbers on how well the investments are going, and give members of the committee the opportunity to ask questions so everyone is more informed on the subject. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Murman. So with that, we'll have our first, I guess, proponent, come on up. Speaker, testifier.
I apologize, I was thinking it's 10 copies. I'll give you two more. Good afternoon, Chairman Murman, the members of the Education Committee. My name is Kelly Sudbeck, E-L-L-Y-S-U-D-B-E-C-K. I am the CEO and Executive Secretary of the Nebraska Board of Educational Lands and Funds. I want to thank Senator Murman for the invitation to talk today. And also, I want to thank Senator Murman for graciously granting me more than 5 minutes to talk to you. You may regret that. I apologize, but I do appreciate that. We also believe this is a very important issue, and we are always happy to tell people our story and how things are going with the Board of Ed Lands and Funds. As you know, the Board of Ed Lands and Funds is a very unique agency in the state of Nebraska. We are an independent agency that was created by the Constitution. We are non-appropriated and a non-code agency. Most importantly, we are a trust. So Nebraska trust law applies to everything we do. The board and I and all of our employees have a fiduciary duty to do anything or everything we do must be in the best interest of the school land trust. The Nebraska Supreme Court has also applied this responsibility to anyone who deals with the Nebraska school lands. And so that means members of this committee and the legislature. So anytime anyone is dealing with the Nebraska School Land Trust, they also have a fiduciary duty. And so the question becomes, whatever we're looking at doing, is that in the best interest of the school land trust? Not necessarily in the interest of anyone else. And so, of course, that's why we're here today, right? We want to determine if selling the land or holding the land is in the best interest of the school land trust. The board and I, and all previous boards, have consistently analyzed this question. And I'm sure you're not surprised that this is not the first time this question has come up in our history. Consistently, the answer, as far as the board has been concerned, is no, we should not sell the land. And that is the opinion that I and the board hold today. And I'll tell you why. When someone suggests that we sell the land, typically their number one reason is that they believe it would do better in cash in the market. They always say, well, we could do better in the market. And as you know, presently the school land trust portfolio consists of an account of cash and then the land. Presently, the permanent account is valued at $1 billion. The land is valued at $1.88 billion. The cash in what's called the permanent fund that is invested, and the income from that fund is then deposited into the temporary account. The temporary account is also where we deposit rent from the rental of school lands, farm, recreational. That money is then what is then sent out as an apportionment to the public schools in late January, early February. So the original balance of the permanent fund came about as a result of the sale of the school lands prior to 1900. And I gave you a map, the white one that says sale of school lands. Almost half of our land was sold prior to 1900. It brought in about $26 million. Now, while that was half of our acres, that was actually 80% of the value of the entire trust. Because as you can see, most of the land is in the east. And back before 1900, that was much more valuable than land in the west. And so the sale of all of that land brought in $26 million. I know I've mentioned this to some of you before. That is one of the worst scandals in the history of the state of Nebraska that no one knows about, how that all came about. But it is what it is. And so that $26 million established the permanent fund. So the land that was left constituted about 20% of the original value of the trust, so about $6.5 million. Now, keep in mind, that $1 billion balance of the permanent fund is increased every year because the land continues to deposit into that fund every year. Oil and gas, royalties, easements, those types of income, that is deposited into the permanent fund. That's about $1 million a year that we continue to deposit into that fund. It also includes unclaimed property and the sheets that doesn't come from us. So trying to analyze this, we deducted all of the deposits that the land has made into that account since its inception. And those deposits equaled about half of the account, about $500 million. So the remaining land was valued at $6.5 million back in about 1900, is now worth $1.88 billion. The cash, which was valued at $26 million, is now worth about $500 million. So as far as value of the asset, the land has far outgained the value of the cash. Our land also has a better cash return presently. And the map with the yellow squares, that is the land that we presently retain today that we manage. And you can see most of it's west of Grand Island. So then I also attached kind of a spreadsheet, a table that compares the cash return with the land return. The top part of that table is the cash in the permanent fund. Right now that has a cash return of 2.86%, a total return in cash, including value appreciation, of 6.7. The land has a cash return of 3.63 and a total return of 9.95. And we update that table every year when we are analyzing how the land is doing as compared to the cash. The second reason I typically hear is that the asset needs to be more liquid. The lands and the money were designated as an endowment by the Nebraska Constitution and the Federal Enabling Act. And those documents restrict our use of the original land grant and the principle of the permanent fund. Like an endowment, the Constitution and the Enabling Act does not allow us to spend the principal. We can only spend the income. And so with that in mind, it really doesn't matter if the asset is land or cash, because you can't spend it anyway. And so it has been the board's opinion that since the land is appreciating faster and has a better return, the land is a preferred asset versus the cash, since we can't spend that principal. The third reason is typically the property needs to go back on the tax roll. Our property, we pay real estate taxes, full real estate taxes on all of our property in every county that we have property. The next argument is it needs to go back into private ownership. Section 16 and 36 were never in private ownership. We received those at the time the state became a state, and so it doesn't go back into private ownership. We've never taken it away from anyone. Finally, they mentioned that, well, we just don't like government ownership of land. I understand that. But I am here to tell you that we are the least governmental agency you will ever meet. First and foremost, like I said, we are a trust, and that governs everything we do. And we do not exist necessarily for the public. Everything we do has to be in the best interest of the trust. No tax dollars support us. We earn our own money, about $60 million a year, by providing an essential service. We are run like a private business. We are very efficient. As part of our job, we compare ourselves to the private land management firms, larger firms. Typically, if you would hire a private firm to manage your real estate, they will charge you 7 to 10% of the gross. Right now, the cost of administering our land is 4% of the gross. So we are more efficient than the private market at this time. Also, the service we provide provides a huge opportunity to young and small farmers and ranchers who cannot afford to buy. You would also lose out on additional sources of income provided by land. For example, wind and solar. Right now, we are about $500,000 a year, soon to be $1 million a year from wind and solar projects. We also sell easements, logging, and any other future stream of income that the land will provide that we haven't even thought of yet. All of those opportunities would be gone. We also have partnerships with game and parks, where 6,000 of our acres are open in the Open Fields and Waters program. We also team with the University of Nebraska for their Mesonet program. Right now, we host 32 sites. We will have an additional 31 sites built, and they are proposing 75 additional sites in excess of that. The university, I'm sorry, I hope my voice holds out. The university has told me if it weren't for the school lands, the Mesonet system would not exist. Now, having said all that, since 1998, the Board of Ed Lands and Funds has devised a plan to sell the school lands in an orderly and fiduciarily responsible manner. If you go to one of the sheets I provided with the green, yellow, and red, that sets out our plan of selling the school lands. The green is listed as priority. Those properties are for sale today for fair market value, about 158,000 acres, 295 leases. Back in 1998, the board analyzed all of our properties and categorized them based upon their return and based upon certain physical characteristics that maybe were not very like accessibility, things like that, things that were a problem. So they class certain properties priority land sale. Those are for sale. Those are our poorest performing properties that we feel that we have a fiduciary obligation to sell. The next category is discretional, 691,000 acres. Those properties are not actively for sale, but to make it short, we could be talked into it. Those are better performing properties. They may have some issues, and until we get the priority land sale property sold, those we will hold in kind of a reserve. And then we have our core ag portfolio properties, 401,000 acres. Those are not for sale. Those are our best properties, best returning properties. We will trade for them, but they are not for sale. We are constantly analyzing these categories, moving properties, maybe from discretionary to priority. Whenever a property is either returning poorly, it will get put on the priority trade list. In 2022, we sold 1,653 acres for $959,500. In 2023, we sold 1,892 acres for $5,113,500. And in 2024, we sold 2,060 acres for $2 million, or we are planning on, for $2,373,000. I also included some other documents in your handout. I won't necessarily discuss them at length. One is a short synopsis of what we do. Another is a report from UNL regarding the trend in real estate valuation from 1979 to 2024. And you can see how the valuation in land has absolutely skyrocketed. Next, I have a list of apportionment payments. That is the payment that goes to the schools every year as a result of our operations from 2000 to 2024. And that totals almost $1 billion. I also have an income statement that represents the income from the operation of the land. That shows that our income is around $55.5 million this last year. And of that apportionment payment that gets paid out to the schools, last year, this last February, is about 59, almost $60 million. $41 million of that is as a result of the land operations. 17 million came from interest on the permanent fund. So we are very proud of our support of the public schools. We are proud of how efficient we are. We analyze that on a consistent basis. We also analyze our assets on a consistent basis to determine if we are doing the best job we can. So it is our opinion that the land should not be sold or any kind of wholesale sale or fire sale. We have a plan in place where we are selling the poorly performing properties. It is working. And we believe we are getting full market value for some of those properties for sale. We're concerned that if we're forced to sell, we may not get full market value for some of those properties. Concerned about the effect that would have on the real estate market, to have thousands of acres flood the market. And our tenants are concerned about it because our tenants are not always ready to buy. And the properties that are for sale, our tenants will tell us, I want to buy that, but I'm not ready right now. And so if there was some kind of a date certain that it needed to be sold, our tenants may not be able to buy them, and they would lose out on that property essentially forever. So I appreciate the extra time again, Senator Murman. If you have any questions, I would be very happy to answer them.
Questions for the committee? Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Senator Wells. Okay, I'm looking at your sheet here, total return of permanent school fund versus total return of school lands 1992 to 2024. So do you invest mostly in savings? I don't understand your return on your cash investments.
Right. So our cash account is invested by the Nebraska Investment Council. And I can tell you what they invest in. I'll grab that.
No, I don't need that, but
Okay.
so you're saying that their rate of return last year at Nebraska Investment Council was 2.86%?
Yes.
Do they have your money in a different account than they have other money in?
I'm sorry?
Is your account different than the other investments they do?
I don't believe so. Now, since it is an endowment, it does need to be a very conservative investment.
Okay. From what I know of the market, and I'm not an expert, this is a very low return on investment.
Right now, I had the investment council give me a report of what they're earning right now. And they have speculated to the end of the year, they're at 3.2% right now.
So I would like, what, are they just investing in cash?
No, they're in equities, they're in real estate, they are in foreign investments, domestic. Let me grab that here. I can tell you. So their allocation consists of U.S. equity, global equity, non-U.S. equity, real estate, private equity, and fixed income.
So it's all equity, it's not,
Mhm.
they're not in the market at all.
Right.
I don't think that's the way they run their other investments.
I wouldn't know.
Okay, so another question. This one is what we did own at one time, or 1900.
That's what was sold. We used to own the white and the yellow, all of it.
So
It
what
used to
was
be,
it, when these yellow dots, I assume, are bigger than the actual land that's owned? How many acres is the yellow dot?
well, it depends. Typically, it's 640 acres a section, but we do own smaller tracts also.
So you own, like.
Right now, we own 1.25 million acres. Originally, we had 2.8 million.
It was supposed to be for little schools, right? It was like 640 acres for each school district?
No, actually, when it was granted to the Board of Ed Lands and Funds, it was granted, it was not per school district. Prior to Nebraska, they were granting land to each township in the state. The problem they had was, as they were developing, as they were trying to set up the state, the townships were not prepared to manage the land. So they changed that when it got to Nebraska, and they granted the land to the state as a whole.
Okay,
Because we could then, we had we'd set up government to be able to manage that. So these are owned by the state in trust as a whole. They were never divvied out per district or per township.
Any other questions?
Yes, yes. Um, Do you buy land also?
We do acquire land, yes.
Okay, and I'm, of course, in favor of selling land when it makes sense, and which is kind of what you're doing, I think. But why, what is the reasoning behind buying land back?
I have a bunch of visual aids, if I can hand those out, if you want to
Sure.
get into it. Okay. I was thinking it works a little better if you're looking at something than just listening to me talk.
Is it because the land is a better investment than where the funds would be invested otherwise from?
Sometimes. So the board's favorite way of acquiring property is to do a trade, straight land for land. So if you look at that first page, years ago, an individual wanted that section of grass from us. And so he had that quarter of irrigated crop ground that he was willing to trade. As you can see, the appraised value of our grass was $568,000. The appraised value of his pivot was $906,000. We traded straight across. And so we went from $21 an acre to $150 an acre in rent and added about $300,000 in equity to the value of the trust as a result of that trade. And I know people usually say, why would anyone do that? Well, in fact, as luck would have it, he just called me a week ago and wants to do another one. Depending upon your tax situation, you can get a deduction for the difference in the value. And that's been successful for him. He needed that section. This pivot was really, it was far away from him, his operation. He had purchased it relatively cheaply, and so he was willing to trade it. And so huge, huge benefit for the school land trust right there. This is what we do. This is primarily how we acquire property. If you turn the page, the top map there of Gosford County, that half section, this is the reason why we maintain what we call a trade account. When we sell property, we will put money in that account in case, as you can imagine, when you own 1.25 million acres, certain things come up where you have to, your fiduciary duty requires you to buy something next to you. In that case, we had always accessed our half section through the neighbor's property to the west. He decided he didn't like our new tenant very much, and he locked the gate and denied us access. So our options were either sue him and lose years of rent, or you see that little yellow triangle there. I used to practice law in that area, and so I knew the neighbors. I contacted them. As you can tell, the road doesn't quite get to our section there. They cut the corner. I contacted that landowner and asked if we could buy an easement. They said, no, but you can buy that corner. So $2,740 later, we bought that corner, and now we have access to that half section, probably doubled the value of that half section, and avoided a lawsuit with the neighbor. Now, the one below that in Chase County, we own that red section. Back in the 70s, our tenant developed those pivots, did so without our permission, which happened a lot back in the 70s. And so they put us in this position where his pivots traveled onto our property. We then discovered that larger pivot to the south, our tenant many years ago had eyeballed the property line and put the well on our property. So that was a problem for the sellers. So they approached us directly. To avoid any litigation or any fight over the well, they offered to sell this property to us. So we were able to negotiate that price pretty heavily, bought those pivots, and right now they return 3.82% for the school land trust. We avoided litigation and then added value to the original section that we already had. Finally, the last page, and this is where I'll go into maybe a little bit of how we determine whether we should sell or not. The section on the top of the page there, that is a very, very poor section. It was on our trade list, was for sale. You cannot find wells in that area. You can see there's a couple little creeks that go in the far northwest corner and the southeast corner. They're not very accessible, and there are cedar trees. The property had not been managed well. It needed to be cross-fenced, but we can't cross-fence it without a well. The property in orange south of it came up for sale. And so our access goes across that property. It starts at Highway 20, goes up and across that property. So our fiduciary duty requires us to review that because that is our access to our property and whether acquiring that property would be a benefit to the trust. Well, they priced that property at $1,200 an acre. We determined that was too much. Also, if we acquired that property, we still had the issues with our section. It didn't really improve it that much. So the board determined at that point, our fiduciary duty required that we not purchase that property. Someone else came in and bought that property. One of the job requirements of the field representatives is they are required to know who that is, find out who it is, and they offered our section to that same individual. He had some 1031 exchange money left over, and so he agreed to purchase our section. Again, this is one that is for sale. He agreed to pay $1,120 an acre for it, which in our opinion far exceeded the fair market value. We sold it to him at auction. No one else bid against him. Now, it is the policy of the board that we do not bid against anyone unless our fiduciary duty requires it. So if you go to the bottom of the page, coincidentally, a couple weeks after this trade, the property in yellow came up for sale. Family was selling its entire ranch. This was one of the 3 tracts for sale. As you can see, our section is connected to it. And you can also see they owned about 80 acres of our section. That was sold many years ago. You can also see, as far as the color background, that is the best part of our section, which is no surprise. Back then, they were allowed to cherry pick and take the best. When we were selling, our section had leased with that property for decades and decades. So it did not have border fence. Also, you can see our access goes across that property from Woodlake Avenue through the middle of that property to our property. So same analysis. Does our fiduciary duty require us to purchase that property? As part of their duties, our field rep was in that area gathering information about how, kind of getting the scuttlebutt of how they thought this auction was going to proceed. There was a lot of concern as to this tract and whether it would sell well. We noticed there was not very much interest. So our fiduciary duty, we decided we needed to monitor that auction to make sure it didn't essentially sell too cheaply. Because if somebody stole it, it's kind of a violation of our, we're not doing our job if we're not watching it. Anyway, it sold for $892 an acre. We purchased that because that essentially we thought we stole it. So now we own our access. We own the rest of our section. We don't have to install a bunch of fence. We immediately lease that property to a tenant. Our return on that grass is 3.2%. So those are typically how we acquire property. Another way is individuals will approach us directly, and we are similar to an angel investor, where they say, I want to sell the land to you because I know I will have the chance of leasing it because I have to farm that. And if they sell it to a neighbor, the neighbor's going to farm it. And so they come to us, sell it to us, they go to the auction, and they release the property. It has happened multiple times. In fact, the one in Gage County, a great guy, was in some financial trouble, sold the quarter to us. His neighbor rode in the combine with him when he was combining his corn to see how it yielded. 3 people showed up to bid on that property. Each one of them had a child that was coming home to farm. The prior owner, our tenant, got the property back and is still farming it. Now, very rarely do we just go out and buy something off the market. We have, like I said, we have an account where we have money in it to buy when we need to buy. We have to manage that account also. Our fiduciary duty requires that we determine if that should remain in that account or not. So at that point, we either give it to the investment council, put it in the permanent fund, or we go buy land. At that point, when we were analyzing that balance, the return in land was better. We found a property in Merritt County that was off the market. It had been on the market for a year. Nobody bought it. We approached the realtor. We asked if there was any interest. He said, well, I didn't sell it. So of course there wasn't any interest. We offered to buy it. The seller said they would still sell it. We bought that property. Our return on that is close to 4%. We went to auction with that property, had 3 bidders, 2 of them under the age of 35, and we got an $80,000 bonus on that property. So we don't bid against, we don't go to auctions, we don't bid. If it's in our fiduciary, if it's fiduciarily proper for us, we will try to improve what we already have like this, or managing our funds. We very rarely go out and just buy something. Long-winded answer, I'm sorry. But.
Yeah, well, I can understand buying land for, for a pivot to go around or access. But the other part, you said very rarely, I don't know for sure what that means, but.
Well, I think we've done it once since I've been here, and that's 8.5 years.
Oh, That's very rarely. But yeah, that's the part I'm not sure I would agree with, but it's very rare. So it's a
And
pretty small part.
I will tell you, when we bought that, I do a lot of work to try to make sure that we're not bidding against anybody. I called the neighbors to the north, their last name's Bader. I contacted them. They said they had no interest, but they said if anybody buys it, we would prefer that you guys do, because we might be able to lease it. I called the tenant who was on the property, who was also a tenant of ours on a different property. He said he wasn't buying it, but if anybody bought it, he wanted us to buy it because maybe he could rent it, and he is renting it. He got property at the auction.
And I just have one more question. Early in your testimony, you said something about something, I didn't follow real close, but something was more efficient than private ownership. I
Yes.
didn't follow what you were saying there.
Our agency, if you look at us at like a land management firm, which essentially we are more efficient than the private market. If you compare, if you want them to manage your land, they will charge you 7 to 10% of the gross income. Right now, our administrative expenses put us at 4% of gross income, the cost of our operations. And in fact, the field representatives that we have out in the state of Nebraska, we have 9. The average for a private management firm, their managers typically manage about 20,000 acres. Ours manage over 100,000 acres. Some manage 80,000. They typically manage about 50 to 60 leases in the private sector. Ours manage an average of 300 leases. The manager in the eastern part of the state, he has to drive 3.5 hours one way to get to some of his properties. So
I would term that more efficient than other land managers, maybe.
Yes.
Than not so much other private ownership, I guess.
no, that I meant other land managers. Yes, managing agencies. Yes.
Sure, I
Yep.
understand. Thanks.
And that's what we compare ourselves. That's really all we have to compare ourselves to make sure that we're doing, I think, what the best thing. So.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I've had a number of interactions with the Board of Lands and Funds. I think you and I visited about the properties in Merritt County.
Yes.
And I just want to point out for clarity, the reason you feel you're so much more, or you're more efficient, the average, say the bank in my hometown averages property, that's usually on a year-to-year basis. He has to work with those tenants. You do 7 or 8 year leases. So it kind of is more efficient and kind of isn't, because you demand an 8-year lease. So you don't have to talk to those landlords other than once every 8 years. Everybody else talks to them every year. So that kind of clarifies that.
Yeah, actually, by statute, our tenants our field reps are required to actually view the property at least once every 5 years.
Yeah, that's just driving by. I mean, I know how that works.
Yeah.
So, been there, done that. And I guess it's nice to talk about how the value of your assets in land have increased. We also have to remember, though, that value is not something that individuals get to partake in. Our country was built on individual ownership of land, and that individual person being able to enjoy the rise in value of those assets. So these assets are not available for that. They're available for a government institution that's managing that land. And I see both sides of selling it and maintaining it. I really do. I know it helps some young farmers to be able to have land to farm, but also when it's not a arm's length transaction when you buy something and then only one person gets to rent it. Because you have already talked to the neighbor next door when somebody 5 miles down the road might want to rent that. So it's kind of a closed transaction when you go into the deal to start with.
Our leases are all public auctions.
Even the one in Merritt County, when you said there was nobody else involved?
The one in Merritt County, we went to public auction with that in the fall. Three individuals bid on that property.
Okay.
Yep.
I stand corrected then.
I know who you're talking about. That individual who was upset about that did not show up.
And that happens as
Yep.
well at public
Yep.
auctions. I know that.
Right.
Yeah.
All of our auctions are public.
So kind of on a on the back of Senator Linehan's comments about the return on investment. That seems unusually low to have between 2 and 3% return. I mean, that's not even CD rates for the last few years on almost $1.1 billion in assets. And I'm wondering, does the Nebraska Investment Group have a different classification for land like this that's trust than they do normal investment assets?
They may, I don't know that. I think it's similar to like the retirement fund, the state retirement fund. And I'm not knocking the investment council. They do a great job. What I'm saying is those investments have to be very conservative, just like the retirement fund. You don't want to lose principal.
No, I understand that.
But I mean, they're doing a fine job. It's just the way it is.
Normally with ag land, and I have some experience with that, the ROI on ag land is not as good as what the market would provide.
Right. As an individual, you can invest your money however you see fit. So you can take risk and get a higher return, or not.
A really low risk investment return better than the normal ag land investment. $8,000 acre irrigated land by the time you pay the taxes.
Sure.
So are the taxes you pay equal to what an individual would pay
Yes.
as assessed?
Yes.
Okay.
No difference.
Thank you.
Now, some would argue that since this land was given to us, it's a 100% return.
Wow.
Senator Linehan.
Are you done?
I'm done. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I just can't quite get over this chart. So 2020-2022, is that 2 years or 1 year?
2 years. It's based on our biennial.
So the 2024, is that calendar year or fiscal year?
Fiscal.
Pardon?
Fiscal year.
So your fiscal year ends when?
End of June.
Okay, so your assets increased between 2018-20 and 2022. Your value of permanent school fund increased $200 million.
And I actually failed to keep one of those myself, so I'll take your word for it. Yeah.
He's looking at this one. So if they're in, the question would be, if they're in such conservative funds, how did they increase by $200 million?
Oh, the 168 million, the gain and loss you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I would not be able to answer that. They would have the information as far as.
And I don't know how it's 168 million when it's,
Now,
am I not doing my math right? It says 1.062. The previous year was 862.
Mhm.
So in my head, that's that's.
I do know that. Now, one of the things that was negotiated when, because the CEO of the Board of Ed Lands and Funds met with the Legislative Fiscal Office when they were developing this. So
When they were developing this being what?
this calculation, so that we
Okay.
could compare the land to the cash.
So your office didn't do this chart, the fiscal office did?
No, we do this chart, but back when it was Dick Endicott was the CEO, we were trying to compare the land to the cash and apples to apples. And so we met with, I believe her name was Sandy Sostet, if that rings a bell. They met with her and there was a negotiation as far as what should be considered as far as the calculation of the return for the permanent fund versus the land. I'll give you an example of one of the issues they had. Since we deposit about $1 million a year into every year, the land claimed that they shouldn't receive credit for that because that's new money. It's not an increase in the value of the asset, just, organic increase. So if you look at the recent 22-24, you'll see that's only $3 million. The first year, they don't get credit for that deposit. The year prior, 2022, they get credit for the deposit at that time. Because, you know, we at some point, they have to get credit for the new money that's deposited into that account. So that's why there's such a discrepancy between 22, 24, and 2022.
Okay, new money into the account. Where does it come from? What do you mean new money?
That comes from the land, oil and gas revenue.
Shouldn't that go to the school fund? Isn't
No.
it income?
It is, we consider, we have for 157 years, consider that special because it is exhaustible. And so it goes into the
Big
permanent fund.
picture, you're growing your value of your fund with money versus giving it to the schools.
Yes, because the policy back then was if the asset is exhaustible, it will go into the permanent fund so that it continues to make income for the schools. And so oil and gas is exhaustible. At some point it will run out. And so that the oil and gas revenue, the royalties, are deposited in the permanent fund.
Well, that might make some sense if you didn't have such huge increase in your value of your land. I mean, the whole point of this is to help schools,
Yes.
right? To help kids.
Right.
So how much per student is this providing?
This is about $161 per student, the total appropriation.
So we got almost $3 billion tied up in investments, and it's providing $161 per student?
Right, about $60 million a year.
I don't. So that's by legislation or that's by constitution? Or is that by your decision or your
No,
board's
that's the
decision?
Constitution and the Enabling Act from the federal government.
That you have to put that money back in to grow the fund?
Are you talking just the oil and gas revenue?
Yep.
I believe that's a statute in our policy and has been for 157 years.
Well, it doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
right, but, okay, let's
Well,
go back
I
to
mean, if
the,
you're talking about, like I said, it is exhaustible, just like the land. If you sell the land, it's gone. You sell the gas and oil, it's gone. And so that's the thought.
I don't know, I
Yeah.
don't have, I'm not gonna go to my calculator, but $3 billion in assets, it ends up 161 per child according to population, not number of children that are actually in school, right?
Right, not enrollment, it's actual population in the district.
Right, so, I don't know, I'll have people who are better at money than me, but this seems like not a very good return on our investment.
Well, like I said, there are those, that, this was given to us. And so,
Yeah,
what
but
you're talking about is the value of the land is the lost opportunity investment. You could argue it's 100% return.
Yes, I understand that, but if somebody gave me $1 million, I would try to make sure that I was making as much as I could on $1 million. Go back to the Gage County example. You talked to both neighbors. You told them it was for sale.
Are you talking about Merritt County when we acquired the
Gage
property?
County, Gage County. You said something about a combine, 3 people in the
Yes.
combine.
So we advertise our auctions, our lease auctions.
Okay,
And so the neighbors realized, or, saw the ad. They contacted us for information. The neighbor knew the individual who was farming that property. And like I said, rode along the combine to see how the yield was. The gentleman who had sold us the property, who was leasing it, was fine with that. One thing I mentioned is some people are upset that at the auction, they get angry when someone bids against them. This gentleman knew exactly what the plans were. He sold it to us because he knew he would have the opportunity to lease it back. And that's exactly what
that's
happened.
the part I don't understand. How did he know if he sold it to you that he would lease it back? Is that forever? Is that
No, that means he could appear at the auction and he would have the opportunity to lease it back as long as he bid enough.
so? He's first in line to.
No. He has the equal right to bid just like anyone else.
Okay, but he's first in line to rent.
No,
It's an auction.
it's a public auction. What I mean is If he had sold it to a neighbor, that neighbor would farm it. He would never have an opportunity to farm that farm again because the neighbor would farm it. With us, he knew it would come up for public auction for a lease. He would at least have the opportunity to lease that property back.
So you bought it even though somebody else was bidding on it?
No, he offered it directly to us, only to us,
Okay.
so that he would have the opportunity to lease it back in the future.
Okay, so if you buy property from somebody, they have the first right to
No.
rent it.
He would show up at the public auction just like everyone else. But if it sold to a neighbor who farmed it, he would never have the opportunity to farm it again. In this case, if he sold it to us, he knew it would come up for public auction. He could appear at the auction and bid against other people and get his lease back.
I think, Mr. Sudbeck, you need to explain to the senators how your bonus system works at the public auction,
Sure.
because I think there's
Okay.
a lot of confusion.
All right.
That's what you're confused.
Sometimes I take things for granted, so
Yeah,
thank you.
You need to explain.
Yeah. So the way our auctions work is we set the rent on each tract of land that we offer for auction, for lease. We advertise all of that. And so once we get to the auction, the only advantage the prior tenant has is we allow him or her to bid in the amount of the next year's rent. So for instance, if it's $100,000 for 2025, and these lease auctions are coming up here in a week, our field representative will say, Senator Linehan, you're the prior tenant. Would you rent this property for $100,000 for 2025? And you bid yes. You say, yes, I'll bid $100,000. We open it up then. If there are other people there with checks for the first year's rent, they can bid what we call a bonus. And so we will look at Senator Sanders. Would you be willing to pay a $1,000 bonus plus the $100,000? You say yes. $2,000, $3,000, $4,000.
For the lease, not for the
For the
land.
lease, for the
That's
lease.
the part I was missing.
Right.
Thank you.
And
Senator
so
Myers.
that bonus payment, however high that is a one-time payment. They pay that day plus the first year's rent.
So where does the bonus money go?
That goes into the temporary account, paid out to the schools.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Conrad. Thank you, Senator Walls. Thank you for being here, Director. I appreciate it. I feel like, and we had a chance to visit this interim period before the hearing, and I appreciated you taking time to answer deeper questions. And I know you're always willing to do that for any member of the legislature or any stakeholder. But in reflecting upon that meeting and then kind of listening to our past dialogue in the committee and then again today in regards to this issue, I almost feel like we're talking past each other to a certain degree. I understand 100% what you're saying under the existing legal structures that have been in place for over 100 years with a few maybe legislative tweaks here and there. This is what we do and this is how we do it. Fair. Legitimate and important perspective and read. And I think that perhaps the tension or direction that the committee and other state senators are heading is saying, okay, that's helpful and understandable, but does that make sense today in a modern era? Is there a better way to leverage or utilize these assets to perhaps meet today's needs? I don't know if we've identified exactly if or how or when that would happen. And of course, it's very complex in regards to the constitutional components, but I just feel like that's almost kind of, just wanted to kind of name perhaps the tension in regards to some of the current dialogue, not unhealthy tension, like a healthy tension in trying to make sure that not only you're doing your fiduciary duty under current legal structures, but we as stewards of the taxpayer dollars and otherwise are always kicking the tires and trying to be creative about how we can get better value or find new revenues or resources. And obviously a lot has changed since inception about with kind of where we are today. So I don't know if you want to tee off on that or share some thoughts or ideas, but.
Sure. I would say we have been very innovative. One change that happened years ago, I don't know if you remember, Susan Buffett and some of the ed committees had an effort to put some of the money aside for pre-K.
That's right.
That happened, and that's about $68 million now of the total permanent fund that's funding that. We have doubled rent in the last about 15 years. And so we are always looking at sources of income. Our tenants aren't always happy about that, but we are always looking for additional sources of income. I understand your point that, maybe owning land is a little bit archaic. I would say it's still performing well. Of course, even if we were equal to investments, we win because, of course, land is one of the most conservative, safest investments you can possibly have. And so, really we should be trailing quite a bit, and we're not. And I would also say, in this day and age, we talked about a little bit with the younger farmers and ranchers, we are more important than ever with the consolidation of ownership of land. We have every option we have has young people there who need additional land to farm. So I get your point. Right now, the Constitution and the enabling clause that gave us that land would be contrary to, cashing out the land, using the money for something else.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Very good. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Senator Murman.
Yes. Do you know how many or how much of your land has residences on it or other machine sheds or even livestock facilities?
Not offhand. I looked at that some time ago. I want to say maybe 500
500 out of
properties. I don't know how many tracts we own. We have 3,000 leases. So years ago, we used to lease this land for 25 years. And we actually encouraged people to build houses so that we knew we would have a tenant, because out west it was sometimes difficult. We don't do that anymore. And in fact, we discourage structures on our properties anymore.
Well, the reason I ask is because the ones I'm most familiar with do have, well, quite a few of them have residences on them, and then most of them have some kind of farm structures on them.
Right. Right.
So it's difficult, I guess, to get a competitive auction in that situation because
Sometimes.
most neighbors are really friendly, don't want to
Right.
bid against their neighbor, especially if they have a house on it.
Right, and the individual who bids on that property would have to buy the house from the prior tenant. And so, yeah, those are a challenge. We are trying to, through attrition, trying to get rid of those because, yeah, they are challenging now. There are some houses that are nice enough that we're continuing to lease out. We really don't allow tenants to materially improve those houses because, like I said, we are trying to phase out of that.
And then in the same way, the ones I'm most familiar with are like, at least I think third generation farmers on there already.
Right,
And the third generation might be as old as I am.
right,
So
Yes.
I'm not so sure, even if they're in private ownership, they would typically be passed on to the next generation, quite often somebody in the family. So I don't know if it's really much different than private ownership as far as young people being able to farm those
I mean,
lands.
yeah, we do have a lot of properties that are legacy properties. They've been in the same family for 100 years. And those are fantastic tenants. We love them all. But they still appear at a public auction for that lease. And so there's always the chance that someone else could acquire that lease to farm and ranch it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I have a quick question. So yesterday Senator Monahan mentioned that this year her and I will be sitting on a beach someplace. So I'm just curious about this Moon Lake property. Is there a chance that you
I
can
will-
buy lot?
I will try to set you up.
Okay.
Would the middle of December, would that work? Or
Yeah, just curious.
we might be able to fit you in January? I hear the beach is lovely in January
I'm sure it
in
is.
Brown
That's a
County.
marsh too.
Any other
As
questions?
long as you promise to bring me along,
Yeah.
as long as it's not in Brown County.
She's looking, are you looking at that?
No, she's still looking at the one.
I just,
Somebody's gonna have to explain this chart to me. So, but we can do that another time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your.
Senators,
Thank you.
appreciate it. You bet.
Always good. And that closes our hearing on LR 378, and we'll open,
Do we have any other?
oh, we do, oh, sorry. I was ready to close it. Sorry. Sorry, Senator Jacobson.
Okay, this has been fun listening. I'm Senator Mike Jacobson, represent District 42. So thank you, Vice Chair Walls, for allowing me to testify today at this hearing. I did have the opportunity, and I thought it was important that I speak here today because I was one who raised concerns on the floor this last year when this was being looked at. Frankly, the information we were looking at was it was transfer of funds. It wasn't the gross transfer. So once we got the real numbers, everything started to make a lot more sense. So I did ask Mr. Sudbeck to meet with me. We met on Wednesday, went through all the information you went through. I'm fairly familiar with these leases and how they work. I would tell you that they are a very unique entity. Okay, very unique from the standpoint. Senator Linehan, you raised questions about why this crappy return. And I would say it looks to me like when you dig in, they're locked into fixed income investments, CDs, short-term bonds, short duration bonds. And so take, for example, over the last couple of years, last 3 years now, what's happened to interest rates? They've shot up. So if you own bonds, even 4 or 5 year maturity bonds, they're big time underwater, okay, which is offsetting some of the return on some of the other investments. The Investment Council has all kinds of, they look at the dollars that are being invested and they all somehow can get invested differently. So one of the concerns is, as I looked at this, is the investment returns are not what they normally would be if you were able to invest it as the Investment Council could in an open investment opportunity. That is more of a reason to keep the land. Now, land values, if you look over the years, they have, every time land values will move up, they'll move down. If you look at the charts, since 1986 is when I follow it, that was a low in the land market. Every time it goes up, it makes a higher high. Every time it comes down, it makes a higher low. And it just keeps moving higher over time. So when we look at any investment, whether it's farmland, whether it's bonds, whether it's any kind of investment, you look at total return. Total return is appreciation plus the actual cash return. Add those two together, and of course, that's what they're showing on that one chart is, here's what the appreciation's been on farmland, the acres that they own, and here's what the net returns are. I would agree with what was said earlier by Senator Maher when he raised the question, yes, you do have longer term leases. There's reasons for the synergies of 9 farm managers managing everything they're managing, because that normally doesn't work that way with farm managers who are managing other acres. But I would still say that I'm pretty impressed with what they're doing, okay? And I think I grilled them pretty well on Wednesday with the idea that, okay, there are properties up in the Sandhills where you've got a section, you get section 16, section 36. So if you haven't traded it out, they may be in the middle of a larger ranch. So there are some ranchers that would probably like to buy those properties. Well, I think pretty much across the Sandhills, if you want to buy those properties, they're for sale. One of the problems you have, though, however, is the other piece that nobody really wants to bid against their neighbor. And so when the lease comes up, you're sometimes at the mercy of the tenant if it's in the middle of their ranch. Now, Senator Hansen's bill to allow hunting on it without permission, that may be a motivator to buy those properties. I'm just telling you, keep that in the back of your mind. But as I look at the process, I do like the mix that they have today with regard to we have a hard asset versus everything in the market. There have been good returns, very good returns. And I think what they've prioritized is they've looked at those properties that are more marginal properties, and I would argue are getting these very crappy returns, and they're trying to sell those properties, which is smart. They then have those more marginal properties that are doing okay. If they could sell them and put it into a better return, they would. And then clearly you have the premier properties. One thing I've learned over the years with farmland, ranch land, don't care what it is, high quality land always has a market, and it brings premiums in good times and it brings above the market in bad times. Marginal land in the good times brings less money, and in the bad times there's no bid. Nobody wants it. So I think they're working fairly responsibly to try to work through that piece. There's a lot of complications. I think it kind of starts with how they're organized, how the investment dollars can be invested. When you start looking at the overall parameters that they're faced with on the investment side, it makes the land ownership side look a lot more attractive. So I came into the meeting on Wednesday with a lot of skepticism and really left that meeting feeling like they're doing the things that I would do if I were managing it. And so with that, I believe that I'm not going to be promoting any bill to this next year to make a change. I think what they're doing makes sense to me. I think we want to continue to monitor it, but I'm comfortable with what they're doing.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Linehan?
Thank you, Senator Walls. Thank you, Senator Jacobson. I get the land thing. Okay, I'm sold on that. I don't get this investment thing.
I don't either.
Okay.
And I think the key here, Senator Linehan, is what were the what were the parameters when this was first given to them in terms of what they can invest in? And is that something statutorily that we could change in the legislature? Because in my mind, they're hedging their risk with the farmland. Why on earth would you not maximize the return on the investment? So I think that's worth looking at.
Because you get to your point, all of Nebraskans, especially kids who grew up on farm, don't ever sell the land, but you can risk other investments.
Right.
But here we're like, never sell the land, though they do sometimes, but we're also like, don't ever risk any of your cash. That's nuts.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
Also, let's remember that they sold the wrong land. They should have sold the western Nebraska land and kept the eastern Nebraska land.
Well, there is, and you can speak to this, there is the constant kind of complaint that we sold all the land in the east, or most of it. We kept the land in the west, but a lot of an unfair amount of the money goes to the east.
Well, I think actually all
Because-
the dollars goes into the pool and gets divided equally. So no
It
one,
goes to where the kids are.
that's true. That's true.
So if you're, third district people have said this to me, here's where the money's generated, but this is where the money goes.
Yeah.
And that's just a population shift. There's not. Okay. I'm done.
Any other questions?
All right. Thank you.
Any other testifiers?
Good afternoon, members of the Education Committee. My name is Tim, T-I-M, Royers, R-O-Y-E-R-S, and I'm here today representing the Nebraska State Education Association as its president. NSEA has long been dedicated to advocating for the educational needs of Nebraska's PK-12 students, as well as supporting sound fiscal policies that benefit our schools and communities. We expressed significant concerns regarding the proposal to sell land managed by the Board of Educational Lands and Funds for short-term revenue gains. The land managed by BELF has historically served as a vital, stable source of income, in fact, for $1 billion in school funding over the last 25 years. Each year, revenue generated from these lands contributes directly to funding schools across Nebraska, providing consistent support that helps districts plan and budget more effectively, especially during times of economic fluctuation. By selling these lands for immediate financial gain, the state would forfeit a steady and reliable income stream that schools have depended upon for decades. This approach may present a short-term infusion of funds, but it would create a long-term funding gap, leaving future generations of students and educators at risk. Maintaining steady revenue from BELF managed lands supports the economic resilience of school districts because, unlike the more variable sources of funding tied to economic cycles, the income generated from these lands is relatively predictable. This stability is essential for effective long-term budgeting and education planning. We urge the committee to consider, although I think the natural course, this is always the danger of prepared testimony. The conversation shifted pretty dramatically from the questions raised in the LR, right? The LR was primarily about looking at the feasibility of selling the lands, and specifically mentioned in one of the lines, selling lands for the purposes of property tax relief. So, my remarks say that I'm urging the committee, but I would want to modify that by saying I'm pleased that the committee's conversation largely centered around kind of reframed to the question of the use of the permanent school fund versus the temporary school fund. Because again, from our standpoint, maintaining a balanced, stable source of funding ensures that Nebraska schools can continue to meet, the needs of serving its kids. So in conclusion, while efforts to alleviate the property tax burden are commendable, they must not undermine the financial structures that safeguard the quality and consistency of P-12 education in the state. We must prioritize approaches that balance immediate needs with sustainable solutions, preserving the resources that allow our schools to thrive and adapt to future challenges. And again, we appreciate sincerely where the conversation has gravitated towards over the past two testifiers and with the questions that are raised, because we adamantly believe the land should not be sold for a temporary, one-time, short-term gain for the purposes of things like property tax relief. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you.
Senator Walls, members of the Education Committee. My name is Kyle Fairburn, KYLE-FAIRBAIRN. I had written testimony. I represent Greater Nebraska Schools Association, GNSA. I represent 25 of the largest school districts in the state. I learned more about apportionment today than I've ever thought I'd know, so I'm not going to go too deep in this. I do want you to know, though, that the school districts I represent get between $330,000 of this money and $10.4 million of this money. We would be very opposed as GNSA for anything that would take this apportionment away, because it is stability. It gives us a number that we can count on every year. So we'd be very opposed to anything. Obviously, the conversation turned. I, again, like Mr. Royals, looked at the wording about selling for property tax relief. That was a concern to us. But again, I think the conversation's taken a different turn. So we just want to make sure that you as the Education Committee understands we would be opposed to selling the property for that. But again, this is stable revenue. I don't know about the investment side of it. I do know that when I was in the school district as a finance director, our ability to gain interest was very, very restricted. You can have CDs and you can have money markets. That's what we had. So I imagine they're working under the same kind of questions with that. So happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator Linehan.
But your job is not your school. I understand why you can only do CDs or.
Right.
But you don't have $1 billion laying around.
No. On a much different,
Okay.
much different perspective there,
Okay.
Senator.
Okay. So by my calculations, OPS, if it's $161 a student, and OPS has 52,000 kids, maybe I didn't add it right. I'm assuming the 10,400,000 is OPS.
Is OPS, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And everywhere in between. We've got Lincoln is right behind them, and Millard's not far behind them.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator Murman, members of the Education Committee. My name is Colby Coash, COLBY-COASH. I represent the School Board Association. My testimony also reflects the school administrators. But our organization is 100 years old. The Board of Education Lands and Funds, I learned today, is even older. But as I look through our history on this, since 1995, our association has had a standing position that stated that we would oppose any reduction of assets of the school trust or diversion of the permanent school fund. As districts, we look at kind of three things that we're always viewing legislation against as it relates to things that fund schools, and that's, is it stable? Is it predictable? And is it sustainable? And the dollars that schools receive from the Board of Education Lands and Funds ticks off all of those things. These are stable funds, they're predictable, and they're sustainable. And more importantly, the dollars that are allocated to schools through this mechanism, these are not dollars that have to be appropriated by this body, nor are they dollars that have to be raised from local property taxpayers. That's important. And it is an important component of school finance that benefits all districts, regardless of equalization, regardless of your place in the state. These dollars go out to benefit all students, and we're very supportive of how that works and would like to preserve how that moves forward. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else that would like to testify in LR 378? Are you opening on your?
No, I'm closing.
Okay, good.
Good. Well, last year, there was quite a bit of discussion on the floor about actually selling off the school lands. Maybe the wording of this LR wasn't as good as it could be, but what I was looking at was, is this investment used in the best way possible to support our students in the state of Nebraska for education? So I appreciate Director Sudebeck being here, and Senator Jacobson and others that testified. Senator Jacobson sharing his banking expertise, and Director Sudebeck giving us this information about how BELF operates. I know, I'm not sure when it was, about 6 years ago, we did have a briefing. Senator Walls was chair, I think, on BELF, and I thought it was very useful. So if nothing else, this was a good, useful briefing, I think, to inform the committee again. So with that, thank you very much.
Any questions for Senator Murman? All right, we did have proponents for LR online comments, 0 proponents, 11 opponents, 3 neutral, and I don't know what ADA is. Okay, sorry. No. That closes our LR 378. And Senator Murman will open on LR 496.
Good afternoon, Senator Walls and members of the Education Committee. My name is Dave Murman. I represent Nebraska's 38th District. I'll be brief because the goal of this hearing is not to study one specific issue, but instead to allow the Department of Education and Dr. Maher to report on the status of the department. I've asked him to speak about workforce trends within the department, some of the challenges and successes they've been seeing, and their goals going forward. Finally, it'll be a good opportunity for the committee to ask any questions to Dr. Maher that they may have. Thank you, and I look forward to this as an opportunity to foster the working relationship between the Education Committee and the Department of Education.
All right, thank you, Chairman Murman.
I don't take any questions right now, or not.
Any questions? Hello, good afternoon.
Ready for me?
Yep.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Maher, Brian, Maher. And for the past 16 months, I've had the pleasure and indeed the honor of serving as Nebraska's Commissioner of Education. I can tell you there's probably nothing quite like me standing between you and your weekend. What an enviable position to be in. Yeah, it's a bye week. Yeah. Well, I truly appreciate the opportunity to share with you the state of education in Nebraska and highlight the current priorities and work of the Nebraska Department of Education. Answer any questions that have been submitted to us and any questions that you may have following my remarks here today. Nebraska has about 360,000 students in public, non-public, and homeschool settings. These students are served by over 25,000 educators and countless more support staff in over 1,300 school buildings around the state. And I'm happy to report that the state of education in Nebraska is strong. I'm proud of the accomplishments of our schools, and there are few places as good or better to raise a kid than to raise that kid in Nebraska. And the data shows it. The Annie E. Casey Foundation's Kids Count from 2023 shows that Nebraska is number 9 in overall child well-being. Breaking that down, they have Nebraska rated as 11th in the nation in terms of education, 17th for kids in terms of health, 15th in terms of family and community well-being, 5th for economic well-being. Our students consistently score in the top 5 performance for reading and math on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, sometimes called our nation's report card. And as you may have seen, our graduates are always toward the top in the country on the ACT for those states whose majority of students take the ACT as their college entrance. I think of these results, and as a citizen of Nebraska, I'm very proud of that, very happy to see that. But I also think of it like the old toy, the Etch-a-Sketch, and I just clear that out. And I think of, would those be the numbers I put in there if I was setting goals for the state? And indeed, they're not quite. They're not quite where we need them to be. We have more work to do. I recognize that you had a briefing this morning on our statewide assessment scores and accountability system, especially since I was sitting in this seat for at least part of that hearing. Our results will be shared publicly in a couple of weeks, but I can give you a little bit of a preview by saying, while we have bounced back from post-pandemic academic dips, we continue to see some pervasive gaps in performance for our students with disabilities, our English learners, our economically disadvantaged, and our economically disadvantaged students. Addressing these groups will be a key focus for our entire team over the coming year. There were several questions submitted asking about our work for our lowest accountability classification, needs support to improve. And you received some handouts this morning that I don't have for you this afternoon that may address some of these topics. But we leverage state and federal resources to help improve our schools in different ways. State appropriations are used solely for priority school identification and improvement. These schools are identified from a subset of our lowest classification level, needs support to improve. We currently have 3 priority schools. There were 76 NSI schools a year ago. Our appropriation from the legislature in this space has remained constant since its establishment in 2015, and the Department of Education has sought additional state appropriations each of the last 2 biennium to directly support improvement of more schools in this classification. And Senator Linehan, we took note of what you said this morning. I appreciate your comments. We will learn from that and not give up on bringing to this committee the request for funding going forward. NSI schools can access supports related to continuous improvement, special education, teaching and learning, and English learners through the Nebraska Department of Education's offices and work closely with their educational service units to support implementation of those resources. One of the other questions that has come our way too is, what's working when we support our lowest performing schools? In 2019, the Nebraska Department of Education created the Office of Coordinated School and District Support to provide coordination of school improvement and support efforts across the Department of Education. Our school transformation officer, who you heard from earlier today, is adept at leveraging cross-agency services, but is not currently able to focus on the NSI schools as their time is spent coordinating priority school activities and school improvement efforts as required by federal law. With our priority schools, we've learned the following 4 components are critical for improvement. First, ensuring that the school leaders are equipped with the knowledge, skills, and mindsets to support strengthening classroom instruction. Second, targeting professional learning for teachers related to instructional practices, like implementing evidence-based instructional practices and using high-quality instructional materials with fidelity and adjusting practices through data analysis. Third, our work has been successful when we're able to support our schools in providing consistent access to grade appropriate assignments, deep engagement in work, educators with high expectations, and strong instruction. Finally, we help our schools to deeply and meaningfully engage stakeholders, including families, students, and communities, to work towards the same goals and improve the school's culture and climate. As you can imagine, this work is deeply time-intensive and doesn't happen quickly or overnight. It requires trust building and staff working alongside the school and district. Our team knows this works and could support more schools if given additional resources, but you've heard me talk about that already. We've been successful through the removal of 3 schools from priority school status over the past 5 years. And I think that is a real success story that I'll leave for another time. But I think that is a testament to what we can do when we zero in and help schools, and when the schools are willing to receive the help and improve their current status. A little bit about the Department of Education. I want to turn briefly to the governance and the structure of NDE. As I've connected with colleagues in similar roles across the country in the last 16 months, I recognize that education governance is varied from state to state, with some sharing Nebraska's structure of an elected state board, which is charged with selecting the commissioner. The state board and the commissioner together constitutionally comprise the Nebraska Department of Education, and together work toward our mission to lead and support the preparation of all Nebraskans for learning, earning, and living. I've been thoroughly impressed by our State Board of Education, and some people find that stunning when I say that, because not all of their votes are unanimous votes. I've also been incredibly impressed with the staff that I inherited at the Department of Education and their dedication and expertise, which is directed toward achieving the mission each day. I've offered you a handout that is entitled About the Nebraska Department of Education. And you'll see in that handout, as you look through it, that we have over 500 employees. And what I find interesting, or found interesting, as these facts became apparent to me, is that the most of the capacity is in our vocational rehabilitation and disability termination services. I worked as a teacher, as a building level administrator, and as a superintendent in Nebraska for about 30 years, and never realized the vocational rehabilitation component, or the DDS component, of the Nebraska Department of Education. Our agency staff are broken into 4 areas. Education, those who provide consultative, evaluative, and support services to public, non-public, and homeschooled students. And I would say those are the people that you would think would be working in the Department of Education. Those people who have expertise in English language arts and math and science, in assessments, et cetera, et cetera. The second division of our agency is operations. Education in the state is a large, large investment. So as you can imagine, with an investment of that size, a significant number of our staff support the pass-through, proper use, and tracking of these funds. You heard from one of those folks here this morning with Bryce Wilson and the staff he has for us to work with there. A third component is one I've referenced a little bit already, and that's vocational rehabilitation. Vocational rehabilitation is a core tenet of our work, and one that unfortunately many, many people don't know about. VR helps individuals with disabilities prepare for, find, and keep work while helping businesses recruit, retain, and retain employees with disabilities. And these citizens of Nebraska go well beyond the birth to 21 that we serve in our pre-K through 12 schools. These are adults who are working in the state of Nebraska. Our statewide VR offices ensure a statewide reach, and almost half of our employees, as I mentioned earlier, are in this space. There are descriptions about each one of those areas on the handout, by the way. The fourth component to the Department of Education is disability determination services. And finally, I would say that NDE is charged with determining whether or not Nebraskans are medically able to receive disability benefits under Social Security's SSI programs. Again, outside what I think most people would recognize as employees in the Nebraska Department of Education, but critical to the quality functioning of the state of Nebraska. Next, I was asked about the work locations for our staff, and specifically whether some of our staff are working from home. One of my first tasks as the Commissioner of Education came from the State Board of Education to determine whether or not, as an agency, our operations were doing the work of the department in a location that best served the department. After holding several listening sessions, my team and I developed a return to office plan for the entire agency. And our goal was to determine where the work of NDE was best served, whether that be in the office or elsewhere, or some combination of the office and elsewhere. In February of just this last year, we put out a new return to office protocol, and that protocol had a requirement for many people to come back full-time into the office and others to come back a majority of time into the office. The Commissioner's Cabinet, those who are administrators and office administrators of each office, and their support staff report to the office every day, as do teammates with significant interaction with external customer service. You might wonder who might that be. Those would be teacher certification and exempt school or homeschool employees, folks that may have to work with folks who walk in to our office. We will continue to learn, as I mentioned, this went fully implemented in February, and we'll continue to learn from and adapt our practices as needed. You may know, or may not, that we are currently have our case before the Commission on Industrial Relations, similar to the larger state of Nebraska's case, and we await a decision on that issue as to whether or not our return to office plan will stand. Next, I have a handout in your handouts that is our organizational chart and a blue book that you are likely already familiar with. You'll see an updated organizational chart, and I'm also sharing details of the work of our agency as found in that Nebraska Blue Book that I've referenced. As you'll see in the Blue Book, each of our offices carry out state and federal legislation and work toward achieving the priorities of the State Board of Education. Also, there is a handout and staff counts and their funding sources. Finally, as it pertains to our staff, I thought it important to share with you the relative stability in the number of staff we have employed over the past 10 years. I thought it was interesting as I looked backwards annually to see how many staff we have in the Department of Education. As important, I want to share the sources of funding. While the vast majority of education funding is state and local funding and passes through the Department of Education, our staffing is highly reliant upon federal funds to operate. In fact, almost 2/3 of the agency's operating funds are from federal sources. A few notes about that handout that's in front of you I want to add and I want to draw attention to. As you can see, VR is the agency's largest office. It includes 12 work sites across the state. In 2017, VR instituted a hiring freeze that was not released until 2022. So you can see in 2017 that there was a regression in the number of folks employed by the Nebraska Department of Education. DDS and SSA also had hiring freezes over that same course, that same period of time, that 10-year period. Additionally, the agency saw a sharp increase in resignations and retirements in 2022, with about 82 resignations and retirements. Many of the additional positions since 2019 are filling those gaps that are identified from the hiring freeze and the escalated retirement and resignations. Lifting those hiring freezes and other grant activities coming into the department, many of which have been fixed-term positions, have helped us fill those positions to get back to that level of that we were at 10 years ago. With respect to the addition of other positions, specifically those that are funded by the legislature, the Nebraska Department of Education continues to work within its general fund and its PSL, the personal services limitation, and does not exceed those allotments appropriated by the legislature. In addition to adding fixed-term positions for a VR grant, two other areas where we added employees include teacher certification. These positions were added to respond to the demands of issuing teaching certificates in a timely manner. The positions were either ESSER funded and have expired, or are cash funded by the fees collected for issuing teaching certificates. Secondly, budget and grants management. These positions respond to the needs in supporting the state and federal funds that we're responsible to monitor and audit. Finally, on this topic, I would say that we have implemented a strategic staffing committee to review every opening. That's every opening where we have a retirement, every opening where we have a resignation, every opening where we have the recommendation of a new position. Also, and at the risk of sounding overly micromanaging, I am a part of that group, so I get to review every request that comes through the department. I really believe we have a quality process for filling vacancies and determining whether or not we need to fill vacancies as they currently exist, or whether or not we need to fill vacancies at all. And then also, I have a handle on new positions that are being recommended throughout the department. Next, you have a handout regarding the priorities of the State Board of Education. In August of this year, 2024, our state board outlined 3 priorities which can help propel us to the top of our nation. For me, I remember them by just remembering the word law, L-A-W. They are a focus on literacy, attendance, and workforce. Those are the 3 areas that our board has identified as areas of top priority for the Department of Education. I'll start at the bottom of the document that you have. Our board identified engagement as a key priority, specifically improving student, family, teacher, school, and community engagement. We're committed to finding ways to continue our progress on career and technical education, expanded learning, and mentoring. with the end goal to cut in half chronic absenteeism by the year 2030. As mentioned earlier today, I forget who the testifier was, and I forget which hearing it was, even quite frankly at this point, but somebody mentioned that attendance issues, chronic absenteeism specifically, is no longer only an urban issue. In fact, it's a statewide issue, and I would tell you it's a national issue. I'm certainly happy that our board has addressed that particular issue. I recently signed on to a national pledge along with 13 other state education officials to attempt to meet this goal and look forward to continuing the work with community and school partners to try to achieve that goal. Secondly, our board is prioritizing workforce development and ensuring a robust supply of excellent educators for our state. Our goal is to cut in half the number of school staffing vacancies by 2030, and we're going to address this goal through innovative approaches like our teacher apprenticeship program. We're thankful for the legislature's financial investments, including the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Act, Teach in Nebraska Today Act, and Teacher Apprenticeship Act. To continue the progress on apprenticeships, the Nebraska Department of Education was awarded a grant from the U.S. Department of Labor focused on expanding access to this pathway to join the profession. I was able to kick off Apprenticeship Month with the governor earlier this week and some other colleagues from the Nebraska Department of Labor on Wednesday of this week at Omaha West Side, celebrating the success and the optimism that we have for this program. Finally, I'll spend a little more time on the final initiative our board has set, and they're very specific with this goal. Our board has set the goal to have 75% of Nebraska third graders proficient on our English language arts assessment by the year 2030. This lofty, but I truly believe attainable goal will be made possible through a laser-like focus on improving literacy for all learners, but especially in those pre-K and earliest grades. The science of reading, family and adult literacy, and coaching will be the cornerstones of us achieving this goal. We've made significant progress this year, and in regards to Senator Maher's comment earlier, and this is a paraphrase, I don't remember if it's an exact quote, what's changed in the last 17 years? I think that's a crucial and legitimate question. I would tell you that I think one thing has changed more than anything else, and that is a laser focus on the goal. For years, we've known the importance of getting to that third grade proficiency. We've known it at the department. We've known it, you've known it in the legislature. We've known it in our schools. The State Board of Education has known it. And I would tell you that I truly believe at this point, we have a laser-like focus, and we have some focus. We have some best practices to emulate from around the country. And I am convinced that we will accomplish this goal. We've made significant progress this year towards investing pandemic relief funds. So the ESSER funds, we reappropriated $6 million within the department, I'm going to say maybe February-ish, to really try to address this issue, and especially those in pre-K through third grade, as I mentioned earlier. We are working on and funding projects with the University of Nebraska Lincoln, the University of Nebraska Kearney, and the University of Nebraska Omaha for professional learning that is on evidence-based instruction, grounded in the science of reading. And I would tell you at our October, might have been September, one of our most recent State Board of Education meetings, conversation on the science of reading. And one of the things I said was, I do not want to be afraid of saying what we are basing our initiative on. And it is evidence-based instruction grounded in the science of reading. We make no apology for that. and that is where we are headed. That is the laser-like focus. And if that's not the difference over the last 17 years, then I don't know what is. So that's what I'm hanging my hat on, Senator. We've also made significant investments in family literacy through our Growing Readers Initiative. We were able to kick off this initiative last year with First Lady Pillen, and to date have distributed almost 800,000 age-appropriate books to children across the state. We again share our gratitude with the legislature's leadership and commitment to literacy through LB 1284 last year, which was championed by some folks in this room, namely Senator Linehan and Senator Walls and members of this committee. We thank you for your investment in this project. This bill requires the Department of Education to adopt a literacy plan. It also not only made that requirement, but it made a commitment, an appropriation of about $1.8 million for statewide literacy coaches over the next several years in partnership with educational service units from around the state. I can tell you we just about have that plan firmly in the plan with the ESUs firmly in place. And I would tell you that the statewide literacy plan, I believe, will be a public document in December when our board approves it. And there are a lot of pieces to it. But if you're wondering what my elevator speech is on it, it is a professional learning model that is grounded in evidence-based instruction, which have their roots in the science of reading. That is what our plan is. Finally, the Department of Education received the largest U.S. Department of Education grant in our state's history, totaling $55 million over the next 5 years. We will work with a laser-like focus with that money. I will tell you that my worst fear is that we spend $55 million and 5 years from now, our proficiency rates have not changed. That would be utter failure, in my opinion. Rather, we have no resource issue. Our issue is putting together a competent plan and then holding true to that plan and seeing the benefit to our students. I tell people in our department all the time, our goal isn't to do a lot of activity. Our goal isn't to train teachers, but through training teachers and through that professional learning model, we can reach our goal, which is to have more proficient readers in the state. And that's something I'm hoping the whole state can get behind. That is our goal. We will be focused and we will be relentless in accomplishing that goal. We've outlined our work in the Nebraska Literacy Project, which is organized by one vision, 3 goals, and 5 tenets. And I am speaking multiple times weekly to groups around the state on this project. It is not a secret. We do not want it to be a secret. We need all hands on deck, folks in education and outside of education, for us to accomplish this goal. Okay. I could talk about this for hours. I will leave that topic and answer any questions you may have on that when I'm done. But I was asked a specific question also pertaining to the funding of our educational service units. And while there may be many different approaches to funding ESUs, NDE recognizes the important work and partnership we have with our intermediaries across the state. ESU funding, like district funding, comes from 3 primary sources: local, state, and federal dollars. Local funding is the greatest proportion of ESU revenue, accounting for almost 2/3 of the total budgets, and less than 1/3 of those local receipts come from property taxes, contracts, tuition, local special education dollars, and distance education. Federal funding is the next largest source of funds, representing around 18% of the revenues in the ESUs. State funds account for about 12% of ESU revenues, with direct state appropriation of core services at about $12 million. You'll notice in our biennial budget requests, we are seeking an increase in core service funding, a feat which has not occurred in over a decade. ESUs are critical partners in our education ecosystem. So we invite conversations with ESUs and with other stakeholders on how we best develop this topic in the state. In conclusion, your favorite part, right? I want to conclude by thanking this state board or our state board of education for their leadership, and our staff at the department for their work tirelessly each day to make our state a more vibrant place to live, to work, and to grow. And I want to thank you for your dedication to education in the state of Nebraska. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm waiting for Senator Marcy to say, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Maher, for being here. You're not standing between us and our weekend. You're just coming at the tail end of a very long week for a lot of us, and all of this to absorb, and I'm still absorbing yesterday's hearing. So thank you for that. I have a specific question, just because of an email that was on my desk here recently. So in the purpose statement here, to carry out mission of agency on behalf of Nebraska students in public, private, and non-public school systems. And it's to certify and decertify teachers. So would you say you, your department, the board work hard equally for public and private to be successful in Nebraska?
I would say that.
Thank you. I do have a note that you favor, or the board favors, the department favors, public education versus private education.
Yeah.
And so where would I direct that citizen to clarify, understand, and be able to work with your department?
Probably to me directly, and then I could figure out where they would go from there. And I'd like to know why they think that, and part of that it just hits hard because we really I don't want people. My title is the Commissioner of Education. It's not the Commissioner of Public Education. It's the Commissioner of Education. I am the Commissioner for Public Education, for Private Education, and for homeschool education. So when it comes to certification of teachers, when it comes to accreditation or approval, they should not be able to look, anybody should not be able to look at us and see that we show favoritism one way or the other. So I'd like to know where that is. I would provide this as a piece of evidence. I mentioned earlier today, on Monday, I had a meeting with 10 people in a group that I call private school leaders. These are private school administrators from around the state. And I just brought them in to have a think tank. And I went through the Nebraska Literacy Project in detail with them and talked to them about how does this impact your schools and what can we do? Because if you remember, our primary goal there is to have 75% of our third graders proficient on the NSCAS exam. They don't take the NSCAS exam. So how are we going to work with you? How are we going to make sure your teachers are trained? How are we going to make sure the students in your schools are proficient? Because we need all schools in our mission of learning, earning, and living. So we'll do our best to dispel what I would say is a myth that we have favorites.
Thank you for that statement.
You bet.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Linehan.
Yes, I want to thank the chairman. This was very helpful and probably something we should do more often because there are a lot of concern in the legislature. What do you do with 500 people? So I'm going to go to this chart.
Yes.
That's all your staff?
Correct.
So, but the one under by function, vocational rehabilitation, that's where most of your staff is, right?
Correct.
And probably most of your budget, or a lot of your budget.
A lot of our budget.
Okay. And
Remember, a lot of our budget is flow through funds though too, like state aid to schools, et cetera. A lot of our budget, yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about your operation
Yes.
budget. I'm sorry. I should have made that clear. And then this says, when you've got these by work location, are these state department employees that are at an ESU or are they in a school?
They are, you're looking at the graph on the right? the column?
Yes.
Yes. So there are specific locations there. Some of those are, some of this is going to be a little bit of a guess, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
There may be a building, an office space that they've rented that is specific for the Nebraska Department of Education VR program
Okay.
in a particular community.
Okay.
It seems to me as one or two of those are either in an ESU or a school district, but they have specific office space in these communities.
So that too is mostly the rehab. Okay.
Correct.
Then just one other question. I noticed, I don't know if it's last week, this week, the learning community in Sarpy and Douglas County, they also are starting some literacy program. Is that coordinated with you?
It is not. It's a really good question. So I found out about that when I saw in the paper that Millard was awarded $635,000. That's a guess. I think I'm pretty close there, but right around there. And so one of the first things that we did in our office was we reach out to Millard to say, what is this? And can you bring us up to speed? And we have a meeting with him. I think it's this next week to ask them, what are you doing? How are you doing it? And does it coordinate with what we're doing here? So we will be finding that out.
Then one of my, hopefully last questions, hearing yesterday, I guess it was just yesterday, maybe it was last week, I can't remember. When you bring this science of reading and all the money and the effort, the department, are the teachers, because I know this has always been my concern about this, you go into a building and somebody's been teaching for 12 years and you're going to tell them they need to do it different. That's not going to be probably loved at the first step. But are teachers having to do this? Because I think it was OPS was here and they said it was a choice.
It is a choice, and it is at least a choice right now. I don't know that it will always be, but it is a choice right now. Our way to roll this out is to work with a coalition of the willing. So we have pilot programs right now. I'm going to say a few of the schools, and there are more than this, but we have pilot schools in the Omaha Public Schools, and it is some of their elementaries. It is not all of them. So it was who is willing to do this. And we're also looking at where are the assessment scores not where we want them. So in OPS, in Scotts Bluff, in Lincoln, in Alliance, in Crete, we'll be in Ralston. So there's a pretty good critical mass of schools that we will be able to professionally train this year. All of them are voluntary, the districts. Now, how that is coordinated in the classroom may be a little bit different, although there is some incentive with some of the programs on either a stipend to the teacher or graduate credit work to help soften the blow if they think they don't have time. So we are incenting some of that professional development as well.
So they can earn graduate credit, which would increase their salaries.
Correct.
So that's pretty good incentive. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for being here.
Other questions? Senator Murman?
Thank you very much for being here, Commissioner Maher. The regret I have is that there's only going to be, I think, 3 of us that possibly might be here next session. So I think this would be very useful for the new committee. I just wish we could do it then. Maybe we can. But and Senator Linehan had a lot of the same reaction I had, and I don't mind saying I was surprised by it, because I think you said you were surprised by it too, that out of the 554 employees, 224 are vocational rehab, and those are actually, I think, all adults. Is that correct?
There's some overlap with students in schools, but it is mainly adult learners, people that wouldn't fall in our birth to 21 age profile that we generally have. Many of them are adult learners.
When a person thinks of the Nebraska Department of Education, I think they typically think of pre-K through 12.
Right.
You know, and there's a lot more to your department than that. So
And you're exactly right. I was very surprised when I saw that about a year ago.
appreciate the report. Thank you.
Senator Meyer.
I guess I just have one thing that I'm really encouraged about, and that's when you address the different types of schools in Nebraska, public, private, and homeschool, because I'm a firm believer that there's a place for all of those. If Nebraska is going to be as good as we can be, we all have to pull the same direction. And if you're going to get to 75%, you need all of those to work together. I'm glad to hear that you and the state board are committed to being the commissioner of all of those. And I think if there's any reporters in the room, that they take that message that the Department of Education and the commissioner are here to work for all kids in Nebraska, not just those in public school. Again, I just think that's critical, because it seems like the tone has been to elevate the temperature and competing forces between those two. And that is not a healthy atmosphere for Nebraska. So I'm glad to hear you say that, and congratulations on your position 15 months in. So I hope you stay a long time.
Thanks. Thank you.
So thank you.
Any other questions? I just have one quick question is, first of all, thank you for the report. It is really, it's awesome. It's really, really good news. You guys have done a great job. You are so fortunate because you have such dedicated and committed staff. Absolutely right about that. One of the things that I was really excited about was the fact that you mentioned engagement first. And not that it was a top priority, but that you talked about it. That's so important. And I kind of wanted to focus in on the engagement of family members and parents. And if you've had conversations about how you can increase family involvement and parental support, what have those conversations been like? Because that's obviously key to, chronic absenteeism and other factors in a child's and their education.
It's crucial. And as optimistic as I am on the literacy goal, I can talk to you about why I think what steps we need to take and here's where we can go. And I don't have that firm vision yet for the chronic absenteeism issue. I would say that the baby step is working across agencies. And by that, I mean, certainly schools own a chunk of that. We have to be right in the middle of that conversation. Also, our judicial system needs to be a part of that. Our law enforcement needs to be a part of that. And we just need to figure out together, how can we all wrap our arms around this? Because at least in my opinion, and this is my opinion, not the department's opinion, this is a community issue. It's not an education issue. It's not just a law enforcement issue. It's not just a judicial system issue, but as a community, how can we wrap our resources around this topic and make sure that we get kids in school? I would say that the best opportunity we have for hope is a pilot program that we have going in Ralston right now. And that's about as much as I can explain, but it brings those entities together. And I think if we can bring those entities together, we can get better family engagement and ultimately get back to the day where whoever the guardian of the child is getting that child to school. So we somehow have gotten away from that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Are there any other? Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate everything that you do. It's very exciting. Any other testifiers? Or is this it? All right. Senator Murman, do you want to close?
Do we have any online?
No, I'm sorry. There were no online.
Okay. If not, no, I don't.
Senator Murman waves his close, and that will end our hearing on our morning results.
Are we done? Is there another one?
No,
That's it.
That's it.
It's
We're
not so
done.
bad.
Is there another one?
No, it's not that bad. I just wondered.
I suppose you have that visit with Senior Sanders.
Senator Myers, don't leave yet.
Shelley.
Wait, we're gonna take all of these.
This is
Everybody have a good weekend.
This, I don't understand it.